When you went over your food prep there, I got a bit of an idea of what you'd be eating in a typical day. But let's get into the nuances there of when you're eating and what you'd eat in a typical day, given your diet is so unique compared to what the average person is eating.
So I'm 6 feet 3 inches tall and currently weigh about 230 pounds. That's where my metabolic set point currently is. That may change for the better or for the worse, but I'm very happy because I used to weigh 297 pounds. And so I'm very happy with 230. I tend to hold more muscle. I'm very active on the farm. And so a great percentage of that body weight is strong bones and lots of muscle. So I'm very happy at 230. I feel great. My clothes fit, except the shirt Nisha bought me. It's a little tight in the chest. But so my typical diet, I just wanted to give that so people would go, okay, well, I'm, 5'1" woman and I weigh 110 pounds. What's my diet going to look like compared to his? And so typically on a typical day, I'll eat probably 2 pounds of beef, probably the yolks from 8 eggs and the whites from 4 of those eggs. I do better with a higher fat, and I'll put butter on the eggs and I'll put butter on the beef as well. I salt liberally. I put a few drops of the mineral drops just because, out of an abundance of caution, because I don't know if that cow grazed on soil that had selenium and had strontium and had molybdenum and had iodine. I don't know if that soil had that. I don't know where that cow came from because I bought it at Walmart or Kroger, right? And so out of an abundance of caution, I always add those things just to make sure I'm getting enough, because if I get a little too much, I'm just going to urinate that away. So probably 2 pounds of beef. Sometimes I'll eat chicken, sometimes pork, but I tend to feel best when I'm eating beef and egg yolks. That feels like where I'm the best. 2 or 3 times a week, I'll eat a couple of cans of sardines with the bones in and the skin on. And I usually put 0 carb mustard on my sardines because I don't love sardines. But with a little bit of 0 carb mustard, I love them at that point, and I can eat them. About one day a week, I'll eat a tin of cod liver or some type of liver. I'll eat chicken liver, I'll eat sheep's liver, venison liver, wild turkey liver, because we're surrounded by hunters, and they all know to bring me the heart and liver. And so I've always got a freezer full of turkey heart and liver, venison heart and liver, and at least once or twice or thrice a week, I'll try to eat some liver, because that is the ultimate superfood. That's inarguable. Anybody who's looked up the nutrition density of liver, any liver, doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be beef liver. It can be any liver. It blows away superfoods like blueberries and kale and Aussie and all the other bullshit that people talk about. If you want true nutrient density, eat 2 ounces of liver twice a week. It will obviate so many supplements. And so I like chicken liver. I like cod liver. I can eat beef liver, but I don't love it. I can eat pork liver, but I don't love it. And so I just stick with the liver I love. And I'm also always looking for liver recipes, because I would love to love beef liver, but as of yet, I can't love it. It tastes too livery to me. But that's literally my diet. Rarely I'll have some veg off my wife Nisha's plate. So she's a ketovore. So she keeps her total carbs under 10 total grams a day. And so sometimes if she's got some delectable looking roasted Brussels sprouts, I'll have one. But that's rare. I don't make a daily practice of that, because even for me, that's too many carbohydrates if I did that on a daily basis. What else? I drink water. I do drink caffeine-free coffee. I've been off caffeine for a couple of months just to see. I'm doing that N=1, the most important experiment to me. Does caffeine affect me negatively or not? And I got a lot of feedback from the carnivore community saying, dude, you need to quit caffeine because I promise you'll feel better. So I'm off caffeine for a month and a half now. And in the future, I'm going to do a couple of months with no coffee whatsoever, just to see if I feel better or not. I feel no different with decaf versus caffeinated. And I know it's not 100% caffeine free. I know that. But when I'm doing no coffee for a month or two, I'll see. Is that beneficial to me or not? If it is, I'll continue it. If it's not beneficial or not beneficial enough, then I'll go back to drinking my regular coffee. But I think anytime you hear something like that, you should be like, I wonder if I should try that. Nothing's going to kill you if you try it for a month.
So your weight loss journey, you started at 297. You mentioned you're down to 230 where you feel good right now. How long was that journey to get down? What would that be? 37 pounds or 37 pounds. That would be what, 67
Yeah,
pounds?
yeah, 67 pounds. It probably took me 3 years.
And what was the dietary progress? Talk about when you really noticed things kick in and the weight started coming off.
So the first few years of my medical practice, I basically lived in scrubs. Okay. I was a full-time emergency department physician working in the ER. And then I also started a clinic, which I thought was going to be a side gig, but quickly turned into another full-time job. And so I lived in scrubs because it was cool. I looked like Grey's Anatomy, but also I didn't have time and I didn't have the inclination to develop a wardrobe. So I just lived in scrubs. They have a drawstring on the waist. And so you can literally gain 10 inches on your waistline and your scrubs will still fit. Right. And so it's very misleading. You're like, no, my scrubs still fit. It's fine. But one day I got on the scale and I hadn't been on the scale. I just never did that. And I was 290 pounds. I'm like, holy shit, that's not good. I knew I'd gained some weight, but come on. And I thought, well, I better get all my labs checked. And sure enough, I was pre-diabetic, had an A1C of 6.1. And at that point, I didn't even know enough to check my fasting insulin or any of these other markers that we now know sometimes can help people. And so I thought, well, I'm pre-diabetic. I better follow the ADA diet. And so I printed out their handout that I was giving to patients, and I started following that, and I started jogging. And I did that for 90, 180 days and got back on the scale, and I'd actually gained 5 or 6 more pounds. And my A1C had went up a little bit more. And that was the epiphany for me. Like, okay, so I honestly don't know a damn thing about how to feed a human. Keep in mind, I've been daily giving nutrition advice to every single one of my patients. Do you find that worrisome? I do. Yeah. And so really the reason I do social media now is to make up for my past indiscretions and my past sins and failings where I actually harmed people with the nutrition advice I was giving them, which consisted mainly of join the gym and join Weight Watchers. That's what you need to do. Stop being a glutton and a sloth. And so, yeah. So I after 3 or 6 months of the ADA diet that made me more metabolically sick, I thought, well, I don't know. I don't even know where to start. And so I read a book by Mark Sisson, The Primal Blueprint, and I read a book by Lauren Cordain, The Paleo Diet, and I found a copy of Dr. Atkins' Diet Revolution for 50 cents at a rummage sale. Those were my 3 first books I read. And I was like, okay, so low carb, nutrient dense. Okay, all right. I kind of see how that, sugar, carbs turn into sugar. Okay, all right. So I started doing then low carb primal paleo, but it wasn't low carb enough. And my health improved a little, but not much. Inflammation definitely didn't improve any because on my paleo, I was eating lots of quinoa and lots of sweet potatoes, right, and lots of beans. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And then I kept hearing about keto, and I read up on that a little bit. I'm like, no, that makes even more sense because it's lower in carbohydrates. Not just am I eating natural carbohydrates, which, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But I'm eating low carbohydrate. Maybe that's the key. And when I started keto, real whole food keto with lots of fatty meat and eggs, I started to lose weight like gangbusters. And when I say lose weight, I mean metabolize fat. I wasn't losing muscle. I was putting on muscle. The more meat I ate, I was actually just naturally carrying more muscle, which I found weird. I thought you had to work out to gain muscle. And I still think you do have to work out to carry lots of muscle. If you want to look like the cover of Muscle and Fitness, you got to work out. But to just effortlessly carry more muscle and have stronger bones, it's literally your diet. And so I reversed the prediabetes completely with keto, lost probably down to 260, 250. And then I kept hearing about Sean Baker in this carnivore diet. And I thought, well, if you think about it rationally, a carnivore diet is just keto, but with the carbohydrate intake turned down to 0. I think I'm going to try this. So I did a challenge on my Facebook page. I was like, hey, let's do carnivore for 30 days. Now, I had other medical conditions as well. One of the things I suffered from was severe reflux, ungodly reflux. I used to take 2 Nexium every day. When the drug rep brought Nexium samples, the patients didn't get those samples. I took them all because it was awful. It affected my speech. It affected how I slept at night. It was terrible. On keto, I got 80% better. Now I could just take a Tums occasionally, once a day or every other day, and my heartburn was under control. I didn't have to take the Nexium, which then subsequently, with some research, I found out all the terrible things that taking a daily Nexium or Prevacid or Prilosec do to your body. They're very, very unhealthy, but most people don't know that, including most doctors. And so my heartburn was 80% better with keto, which, oh my God, if you've ever had severe heartburn, that's a big deal. But after that month of carnivore, I'd lost another 5 pounds, but I had zero heartburn, Jesse. And that was miraculous, to not have to worry about where the Nexium was, where's the apple cider vinegar, where's the Tums. I didn't have to worry about that. And I didn't realize it the first few weeks of carnivore, but on that last day, I'm like, holy shit, I haven't had any reflux for a month. This is awesome. I'm going to do this for another month. And the weight loss just kept going. And so I had stalls and sticks just like everybody else. I stuck at 260 for quite a while. Then I stuck at 250. Then I stuck at 240. And now I'm stuck at 230. Is this my optimal weight, or should I be 210? I think that's debatable at this point, with my visceral body fat percentage being what it currently is, which is well within normal range. Would I be healthier at 110? I'd probably look better, but I don't know if I'd be healthier or not. I think at some point there's a range of healthy body fat, and there's a range of body weight that's healthy for people. I don't think there's one specific number. But I've been carnivore ever since, and that's been 4 years now, 4.5 years. That there's literally, and so every now and then at Christmas anniversary, I'll go off a little bit, but I immediately feel it in my gut because I fatten very easily. I'll immediately feel my pants starting to talk to me, and also I'll start to have just a little echo of heartburn if I get too far off, or I'll have a little echo of the severe knee arthritis that I used to have every single day, even in my mid-30s. That'll start to flare up, and I'm like, oh, okay, time to tighten it up. Because my goal is I care what the scale says, but that's not my primary motivation. My primary motivation is being a good example to my 6 kids and to my community, to my family, and my patients. Is being very motivated mentally, being very active physically. We have a 40-acre farm, and I'm out there. As soon as we're done, I'm headed to the farm to work for multiple hours, and I want to be able to do that without having to take breaks, without having to be exhausted, without having to be in pain the next day. Those are my whys, you might say. Why are you doing this? That's why. I want to be kicking the soccer ball around with Beckett's grandkids. When I'm 107, I want to be that guy out there with all the family going, oh, Grandpa, sit down, you're going to hurt yourself. And I'm like, leave me alone. I'm playing with my great-grandkids. That's the guy I want to be. And I think this is the way of eating that's going to get me as close to that as is possible. And so it was on carnivore that I attained my lowest body fat percentage and my lowest weight on the scale. Zero heartburn. Joint pain, non-existent. I used to have rosacea. That's gone with carnivore. I used to have severe dandruff. I used to have severe toenail fungus. There's a long list. It was not pretty at all. Okay. I'm not sure how I landed Nisha Salisbury, but I did somehow, luckily, thank God. But it was not a pretty picture. I was not a happy guy. I was not comfortable with how I looked in the mirror. I was not comfortable with the way my body was performing. And on that journey from high carb to low carb to keto to ketovore, now to carnivore, that was my journey. And will I always have to stay a carnivore? I mean, I don't know. I love it. I'm happy to stay here. But would there come a time when I could go back and eat 50 total grams of carbs a day? Maybe. I don't know. We currently have no research, no testing for the epigenetic stuff. There are people out there who will try to sell you genetic testing and epigenetic testing, but currently we do not know enough about that. There's not enough research for that to in any way be reliable. And so all we can do is just go by how we feel, how we're thinking, and how we look in the mirror. That's literally the state of the art that you've got to go on right now as far as what foods you should eat and what food-like products you should avoid.
So you've narrowed your diet down to carnivore, and you mentioned 4 or 5 years you've been on this diet. What is it like when you sit down to a meal having only that narrow range of foods you're eating? Do you still get excited about food, or has it just become fuel at this point? Talk about how you feel because, again, you've been doing this a while now and having a lot of the same foods.
So very many people are mortified when you say all you're going to eat for the next 90 days is beef, butter, bacon, and eggs. They're like, I'll be bored to death. I will. That's diet. There's no way. I need variety. Well, for many people, that's the addiction talking. Because if you eat a large enough variety, there's going to be some sugar and carbs in there, right? For other people, they think that, but I have yet to sit down to a plate full of perfectly cooked ribeye and eggs and say, darn it, I'm so sick of ribeye and eggs. That's yet to happen. And so I think a lot of people are pleasantly surprised that when they're eating nutrient-dense, ancestrally appropriate food that's uninflammatory, their body quickly falls in love with that food. And it's never the addiction fall in love with, like when you used to be craving that huge bowl of Cocoa Puffs and chocolate milk every night as you watch Netflix. It's not that kind of pleasure. It's a different kind of pleasure. It's a more instinctual pleasure, a more biological pleasure. But I'm never disappointed when I sit down to a plate of meat and eggs. That's number one. Number two is don't you miss all that other stuff. And initially, when I was going low carb and primal and paleo and keto, I would miss it and I would go back. But that was the addiction talking. Now, as my body has come to realize, oh man, we're about to sit down to pure nutrition. Yes. And remembering what happens when I eat that inflammatory junk, I don't miss it at all. And it's not even that I don't eat it now because I don't want that flare up of rosacea or that flare up of GERD. That's not even the motivation. Now, I don't even consider this food anymore. This is not food. And I think when people have that shift in their paradigm, that makes them bulletproof at that point. You can't trick them. If you come out with a new granola bar or a new cereal or a new protein, this, that, or the other, they're just like, no, that's not real food. I eat real food because I want real health. So I eat real food. And I think for many people, that's almost the armor. After you've done this for a while and you've strayed a few times and you've reaped the inflammatory harvest of straying from your diet, you're like, oh, that sucked. Okay, let's not do that anymore. So you get that negative feedback, and then you're getting the positive feedback from eating this nutrient-dense food. But at some point, you just realize it's like an epiphany. You're like, that shit's not even food. My grandmother called it food, and my mother called it food. And people don't realize it takes 2 generations to form a habit in a culture. If your grandmother taught you something and your mom reinforced it, that's it. That is that in your animal mind, that's law. That is a law of nature. And so if you grew up with your mom and your grandmother giving you this, you think this is food. You're deluded. And they loved you and they still do. They didn't mean to mislead you, but they were misled. And so they passed on this misleading tradition down to you with nothing but love in their heart. But yet you're the one suffering. So it's not your fault, but it is your problem. That's the bad news. The good news is you can fix this by realizing, okay, let me think again with fresh brain. Let me look with fresh eyes. What should human beings eat on a daily basis? And what should they never eat on a daily basis if the goal is optimizing my physical and mental health? And so now if you could make me the most scrumptious hot fudge sundae cake, whatever, it's literally not tempting at all. But there was a period of time and during the transition where I'd have been like, one bite's not going to hurt anything. And then that one bite turned into 2 servings. But now I'm not even tempted by that. And I think most people find that when they've been PhD long enough, strict enough, it just loses its magic. And I think that's a large part of it. We learn superstition from our friends and family, right? If you just think about us as an organism. We learn black cat crossing the road. We learn that stuff's not inherent. That's not intuitive. We're taught that. And then we pass that on to our ancestors. But obviously a black cat crossing your path is meaningless. It means nothing. But we're taught that. And so we make the sign of the X and all the other superstitions that we do because our grandmother and our mother, our grandfather, our uncle, people that we evolutionarily listen to without filters. Whatever they say is that's the law of nature because that's how we're programmed to think as children. so many things that you were taught are incorrect. And that's okay as long as you realize that and you re-examine everything you were taught about nutrition, and in many cases about living a proper human life. You gotta revisit all that stuff with a fresh brain and fresh eyes and go, is that really true? Or is that not true? And that continues to happen to me, Jesse, even to this day. And this is my life. I study nutrition and medicine and anthropology and paleoanthropology. That's literally, ask my wife. She'll be like, yeah, I'm tired of hearing it. I don't want to hear it. But I still discover things like, oh, holy crap. I've never thought of it that way before. Huh. Okay, got it. And so don't feel like, oh, I'm an idiot. I'm dumb. I don't know any of this stuff. Every time you learn and every time you unlearn one of these superstitions that you were taught, you're one step closer to your goal of physical health and mental health. You're one step closer to achieving the waistline and the A1C and all the other markers. You're one step closer. And so as you unlearn just as quickly, and it goes hand in hand with learning, you're also unlearning. Ultimately, you're going to have unlearned enough bullshit and learned enough true nutrition fact for human beings. There's good health. There it is, right in front of you. And at that point, it'll seem self-evident, like, well, duh, but you got to unlearn a lot of false beliefs that you've been taught, in many cases by Kellogg's and General Mills and Kraft, Heinz and Mondelez and Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They've taught you tons of things as you were growing up through television and magazine commercials. But you in your subconscious, you think that's fact. But it's not fact. And you got to unlearn all those things. And so for many people, this is almost a journey of self-discovery or rediscovering who they really are and what they really are. And some people hate that journey and they fight every step of it, but others love that journey, like discovering who I really am and what I really need and what I can do without and what's bullshit. Many people love that journey. And I'm one of those people. I love that journey. Every day when I discover I was wrong about something, that's a huge happy moment for me, because not only now do I get to be even more healthy, but I get to help a million people. They don't have to keep making that same mistake for 5 more years until they discover it. I can make a YouTube video and they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. That makes good sense. I'm going to try that.
If you're enjoying this episode, let me know by clicking like and subscribe below. Thank you so much, and now back to the show. But let's move into saturated fat and explain what's going on there so people are properly equipped for themselves and if they have to have a conversation with their doctor.
Yep. So the same type of research that I was talking about with the red meat and diabetes, the observational, epidemiological, prospective cohort studies, that's exactly the same kind of studies that were done that proved that eating saturated fat, eating animal fat, eating red meat would increase your risk of heart attack, would increase your risk of stroke, would increase your risk of death. That's the same kind of research. And again, as I said earlier, human beings have been eating lots of fatty red meat since we have been a species on this planet. The entire 300,000 years. There isn't, and only after the agricultural de-evolution. I don't call it a revolution. It was a de-evolution because it actually harmed our health. Although it gave us as a species the ability to procreate more and for our population to explode and for things like governments and taxes and tax collectors and slavery and bondage. Those things were invented after we started the agricultural de-evolution. But human health actually got worse and continues to get worse to this very day. So that's the same kind of research. So again, as I said earlier, if you come at me with an extraordinary claim, red meat causes heart disease, saturated fat causes heart disease, that's an extraordinary claim. You're saying that something that humans have eaten for our entire existence on this planet has been bad for us this entire time. That's the claim. Saturated fat, animal fat. You better have some damn fine evidence, randomized controlled trials, maybe a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials to prove that to me. Otherwise, I'm going to ignore you. And so when I first started doing this 5 or 6 years ago, Jesse, I just believed when Harvard School of Public Health published something, I'd be like, okay, got it. I would just take it in and move on. I would only read the abstract. I didn't read the whole study. I'd forgotten my statistics training and my epidemiological training. that we got in my undergraduate classes, and also in the first year of medical school, we had a 1 hour a week class that kind of helped us understand statistics, but it wasn't nearly as much as it should have been. I would just take that at face value and be like, okay, Harvard wouldn't say it if it weren't true. And most people, I think, do that as well. They're like, well, I mean, if Harvard published a study and then the Wall Street Journal has an article about it, that sounds pretty reliable to me. Who am I? I'm a truck driver. I'm a hairdresser. I'm a waitress. I'm a factory worker, whatever. I don't know anything about this stuff. But this guy from YouTube and this guy, from podcast fame, they're telling me, no, you can't trust that anymore. And I think that you're right not to trust that anymore, to take all that with a huge grain of salt and do your own research about this stuff, because there are very, very excellent sources of information on YouTube and other social media that show clearly that this is not true. And Jesse, you know this, in the show notes of every one of my YouTube videos, including the one I just posted about type 2 diabetes being caused by red meat, down in the show notes are links to every bit of the research that I talk about, every bit of all the press releases, everything. I link everything because I want people to look it up for themselves, because you don't really have to be an epidemiologist or a dietitian or a doctor or a PhD. You don't have to be that to kind of sort this stuff out. When you realize that the bedrock assumption is that whatever food we were eating for the last 300,000 years, for 99% of our time on this planet, that's probably the best food for us to eat, because evolution is, in fact, the ultimate scientific experiment. If you're eating something is not helping you reproduce and evolve and grow and live, you will become extinct. And we see this multiple times in biology. This has happened multiple thousands, if not millions of times since life has been on this planet. If you get off into some eddy you get off into an evolutionary dead end, your species becomes extinct. But yet humans eating lots of fatty red meat are literally now the apex species on the planet.
Let's come back to the saturated fat story. I think it'd be helpful to go through the conventional story of how that leads to heart disease, and then we'll talk about the holes in that story, and then we'll correct it and talk about how too many carbs are actually what's causing that.
Yeah. So the main argument that the average primary care doctor uses on patients when it comes to eating saturated fat causes heart disease is they will literally say something like, eating all that saturated fat clogs up your arteries. And they'll even have a model on their countertop in the exam room showing this clogged up artery. See, this is cholesterol right here in the wall of the artery. If you eat foods high in cholesterol and high in saturated fat, you're clogging up. And using that word clog immediately brings up the analogy of your kitchen drain. And all people know that if you pour grease into your kitchen sink, when it cools down, it solidifies and it'll stop up your sink. We all know that. But people don't think through that simple analogy. First of all, we're not room temperature. We're 98.7 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Fat never solidifies in our body. First of all, if you just want to use that simple romper room illustration or analogy, that doesn't happen in our body. We're very warm-blooded. So, and then secondly, if you start to press the average primary care doctor on that, like, wait a minute, our body is not the same temperature, room temperature as a sink. That's not going to work. Plus, it should clog up our esophagus and our stomach and our intestines, not our arteries. Somehow it got into the circulation. How did it do that if it clogged up? It should clog up my esophagus. I should starve to death. That's what saturated fat would do, if that's really true. Well, at that point, you've reached the end of your primary care doctor's understanding about the biochemistry of this and the physiology of this. At that point, they'll start to get emotionally upset with you. And that's a huge red flag that your doctor doesn't understand the science. Anytime a professional starts to get upset with you emotionally, that's a bad sign. That means they don't understand what they're talking about. They just basically threw you a line of crap and expected you to swallow it. And now that you're pushing back a little bit, you've reached the limit of their knowledge. And so that's why on my videos, I don't go in as much depth as other people do, because I'm just trying to get people to understand the basics of this. Because I'm talking to the patient. And then I'll let the patient talk to the doctor, because in many cases they've changed their doctor's mind and their doctor's now recommending a proper human diet. So that's what I enjoy doing, is talking to patients and be like, look, that doesn't make any sense. Do this for 90 days and then recheck your labs. And so what the doctor would say is, if you eat saturated fat, that's going to raise your total cholesterol. That's going to raise your LDL cholesterol. And now that total cholesterol is just about being completely shot in the head as a risk factor for heart disease, now they only want to talk about LDL cholesterol. Well, as more studies are coming to light that were buried, we're starting to see that LDL cholesterol is probably a pretty poor marker for heart disease. Right now, they're starting to talk about things like ApoB and like LP little a and small dense particles. And it's like, okay, yeah, you keep finding a new test to talk about, and then we keep shooting that test in the head. Like, you remember TMAO. That was huge for a minute. Oh, if you eat red meat, your TMAO will be high. That's going to cause heart disease. We know it. We've done the genomic studies. We just know it's a fact. You don't ever hear about TMAO anymore, do you? Because it fizzled out. It literally wasn't a predictor of anything. And so the same thing I predict is going to happen. It's already happened to total cholesterol. And now it's going to happen to LDL cholesterol. Then it's going to happen to LP little a. Then it's going to happen to ApoB. These things are not markers. They're not. They may be proxy markers of something going on in your metabolism, but they are not causative substances, causative molecules for heart disease. And I think in the next few years, you'll start to see that very clearly, that none of the vegan cardiologists are talking about ApoB anymore. They're not talking about LP little a. They'll be off talking about some new tests that they've discovered that proves that eating a plant-based diet is the best, healthiest diet for your heart. And then we'll debunk that test. And then you're going to see this moving goalposts as the carnivore and keto community continue to grow almost exponentially, because you've got such a large database now of people who've been eating literally saturated fat every day of their life, eating red meat every single day of their life for 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 25 years. And you can check a CAC score, a coronary artery calcium score on them, and it's 0. You can check, and yeah, man, their total cholesterol and their LDL cholesterol is sky high, but their coronary arteries are clean as a whistle, because their A1C is normal, their fasting insulin is normal, their triglycerides are normal, and their HDL cholesterol are all 4 normal. And their markers of inflammation, their CRP, sed rate, ferritin, homocysteine, and others, they're all normal. Their arteries are squeaky clean. And so then, because they're saying, if you just think about this, Jesse, they're saying if you just 2 servings of red meat a week increase your risk of diabetes. That's the current study. The previous study was just 2 servings a week increase your risk of heart disease. Well, what do you do with somebody like Sean Baker, who's eating 3 pounds of red meat a day with the fat that comes with it? And he's been doing that for a decade, and his coronary arteries are clean as a whistle. How do you square that? Because if red meat is so dangerous that just 2 servings a week increase your risk, then somebody's eating 3 pounds of red meat a day, like Sean is, or like I am, our arteries ought to be riddled within just a year or 2 or 3, just completely destroyed by this fatty red meat diet. But yet we don't see that. And so at some point, I would expect the Harvard School of Public Health guys to say, let's compare. Let's take a cohort of 100 vegans and 100 carnivores, and let's follow them for 5 years, and let's follow their A1Cs and fasting insulins, and let's do CT angiograms on their heart, and let's do CIMTs, and let's just check everything on these 2 cohorts as they go forward into the future. Man, I would love it if they did that study, but I predict they won't. But even though it'd be a very easy study to set up and do, because vegans are very proud of their diet and they love their diet, and they'll stick to it when nobody's watching, usually. Carnivores are very proud of their diet. They proclaim it from the rooftops on social media. They love their diet. They're going to stick to that carnivore diet almost without exception. And so you would know that you would have very high retention in both of these groups, and you could follow their metabolic markers through the years. And that would put this to rest forever. And so then the majority of people out there who are omnivores, that's what most people are. They eat some plants, eat some meat, whatever. They just eat whatever. Then you're saying, okay, we've got the two extremes here, the vegans and the carnivores. How do they do metabolically as time goes on? Because also you eliminate healthy user bias, don't you? Because both groups, they want their diet to be the best one. So neither group's going to be smoking. They're not going to be drinking much alcohol. They're going to be out there doing wind sprints or lifting weights or doing something. And so you eliminate all the biases that can slip into the research results by doing a study like that. And that's why I predict Harvard won't do that study.
All right, so you've made it clear saturated fat, red meat, they're not the culprits when it comes to heart disease. But let's talk about, we know a lot of people are affected by that, and it's a real issue in society these days. So let's talk about the truth of what's happening there.
Probably the vast majority of heart disease is caused from eating or breathing in things that damage the glycocalyx on the inside of arteries and the vasa vasorum, which is the tiny little vasculature that wraps around most arteries and goes through the arterial wall to actually feed the inner membranes of the artery. When something is inflammatory, it causes inflammation. And there's actually studies that show that the glycocalyx, which is this tiny little cilia inside of the artery wall, inside of the artery, in the lumen, that they do thousands of things. They do the glycocalyx does things that we have not even discovered yet. That's my prediction. We'll see how that prediction goes in 10 years. But when you eat a highly inflammatory, high carb, sugar filled meal, or drink a Coca-Cola, or drink a fruit juice smoothie, we can actually see the glycocalyx just become inactive. It either sheds off or just becomes completely paralyzed after that high carb inflammatory meal. That's a big deal, but the average lipidologist, they don't want to talk about that at all. They just want to talk about the saturated fat. So the vast majority of the damage is done by causing inflammation and damage to the tiny arterioles and the capillaries that feed every single cell in our body. And that damage is caused by a high carbohydrate inflammatory diet. So you wind up with high blood sugar, high insulin, and high levels of inflammation. Those are the three horsemen of heart disease, also of brain disease, also of kidney disease, liver disease, any disease you can think of that's chronic and progressive. It's being caused by hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, and chronic inappropriate levels of inflammation. That's what's causing all of it. And that's why when you remove the high carb foods and remove the inflammatory foods, everything goes back to normal, because it's vital that everybody understand this. The default setting on your body, and I'm talking to you, all you guys, the default setting is good health. Okay. If it weren't, you would have died in childbirth, or you would have died in utero, or you would have died in childhood. You are set. That's your default setting. Only to the degree with which you slowly poison yourself, either by ingesting pollution in the form of high carb inflammatory foods, or breathing pollution, or drinking pollution in the form of alcohol, will your health suffer. And that's why when somebody goes real whole food, meat heavy keto, or ketovore, or carnivore, they feel like it's almost miraculous. But it's not a miracle. It's physiology. You've basically removed all the things that are causing hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, and chronic inappropriate inflammation. You've removed those things out of your diet. And most people try to breathe clean air. Most people try to drink clean water. Most people try not to smoke. And so once you've removed all the pollution, whether edible or not, your body starts to heal. And it's not a miracle. It's just that your body's default setting is to be healthy. And so it starts to heal all the damage as best it can. And you go back to this level of health that for many people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and beyond, they never dreamed they would have that level of health again. And that's why it feels miraculous. But it's not. It's just it's the physiology doing its job of trying to keep you healthy. And only when you batter it down so much with just too much food, too much pollution, too much alcohol, does it just give up and say, okay, I'm permanently damaged. I can never recover that degree of health again.
We've talked a lot about the diet and specific foods that you're eating and the whole continuum of carbohydrates. But I think a big piece of this that we don't want to leave without addressing is the when to eat piece. So let's talk about what you do there and how you look at that.
Yeah. So again, what we're trying to do is mimic our ancestors for the last 3.5 million years ago, before 15,000 years. How did they eat? Did they eat 3 meals a day with snacks in between? Obviously not, right? But the big food manufacturers want you to think that 3 meals with snacks in between is the proper human diet. But quickly you're like, that was impossible. There's no way they did that. Probably what they did, from the anthropological evidence that we have, is they ate once a day, twice a day, maybe once every other day, depending on how tight the food situation was. And they fasted for the rest of those hours of the day. And so many people try to start their health improvement journey with intermittent fasting, but if you're still eating a high carb diet, that's going to suck really, really bad. That's going to be very, very hard to stick to. It's going to feel like semi-starvation. It's going to feel like calorie restriction. But if you start first by eating plenty of healthy animal fat and healthy animal protein, it becomes very easy to do some degree of intermittent fasting. In many cases, you forget to eat because you're just not hungry. And so the reason all this matters for weight loss is because of something called hyperinsulinemia, which is very, very common. Probably if you lined up every adult human in the United States and check their insulin level, they're going to have some degree, probably 80-90% are going to have some degree of hyperinsulinemia. But doctors don't check that. You don't know to check that. So you don't know. You're blind to that. And when you start to lower the carbohydrate intake, your insulin level starts to return back to normal. That's the sweet spot where you can start to metabolize or burn fat, right? And so the longer you go without eating, the lower your insulin goes. That's important. And that's where fasting comes in and holds hands perfectly with keto or carnivore. And so for me personally, I'll just tell you what I do. I typically fast until somewhere between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. Every day. I don't even think about eating. I'm up making a video. I'm working on the farm, playing with the kids. I don't even think about food until somewhere between 2 and 6 p.m. And then I'll start to get a little hungry. And depending on what's going on, I can fast for longer if needs be. If not, I can come in and do my food prep, my meal prep that I told you about earlier. And, have my meat and eggs cooked in 5 minutes, eaten in 20, and then I'm done. So I may eat 1 meal a day, depending. Or I may eat a second meal 2 to 4 hours later. And so my feasting window, and I call it a feasting window because I don't want you to portion control. I don't want you to calorie restrict. I want you to eat until you're comfortably full in those 1 or 2 meals a day. That's usually somewhere between 2 and 6 hours. And that it depends on family, social, other things. But on average, it's 2 to 6 hours a day is my feasting window, which leaves me with a fasting window of 22 to 18 to 22 hours. That's just my life. Gives me much more time to do stuff. I don't have to take snacks with me when I go out on the farm and work, or when I'm traveling. I never eat in airports. I never eat on airplanes. I don't need to, because I'm eating enough healthy animal fat and healthy animal protein that I'm satiated. I can fast if I need to. And at 2:30, I definitely still have stored body fat. So I'm in no danger of starving to death, right? I've got enough stored fat that if something happened and I couldn't eat for 7 days, I'd be perfectly safe and fine. As long as I had some water to drink and some salt and minerals, I could not eat for 7 days. Now, I don't do extended fasting. Some people love that, but I don't do that as a rule for me. It's just not necessary. I'm happy with where I'm at. But if I were still much more overweight than I wanted to be, I would start to do a 2-day fast once a week, or a 3-day fast every second week, or a 7-day fast once a month. I would implement that if I still were not happy where I'm at body fat percentage wise. And for many people, they enjoy that and they get mental health benefits from doing those longer fasts. And I'm a huge proponent of those. I think fasting is part of a proper human diet, is not eating all day long every day. And so, but that's going to cost the big food manufacturers millions of dollars if we all stop eating 3 meals a day and 3 snacks in between. That could tank the economy theoretically. But I'm not interested in the money side of this. I'm interested in your health. And so I think for most people, if they'll start by lowering the carbohydrates, the fasting will naturally follow, and you won't even have to really try. And so I recommend fasting. It's one of the principles of a proper human diet. And I didn't mention it earlier, but that's because I don't think it should come initially. I think it should come after a few weeks or a few months on a diet that's full of enough fat and enough protein that your hunger hormones are calmed down, your satiety hormones are triggered, and your fasting insulin level has returned back down to low normal, then it's much easier to fast. You don't even really think about it. Sometimes it's even accidental.
Let's come back to the thesis of this conversation, which is meat. We're defending meat in all different cases. It started out with type 2 diabetes, then we moved into saturated fat. The other big one that comes up is cancer. So for somebody who's been avoiding that, adopting a plant-based diet or a high amount of plants in the diet because of that, let's debunk that one.
Okay. So all of the research showing or implying that eating red meat or eating processed meat increases your risk of colon cancer. And that's the most common cancer that people are going to talk about from eating red meat or eating processed meat, eating bacon. Well, again, that's an extraordinary claim because we've been eating red meat the entire time we've been here, right? So you better have really good evidence to support that. Well, the World Health Organization actually came out and said that processed meat is a probable carcinogen, and that red meat is a possible or probable carcinogen. The World Health Organization, they would never say something like that without having just concrete evidence. Now, if the average person believed what I just said, could you blame them? It's the freaking World Health Organization. Of course, you're going to just believe that they would never say anything unless they've got black and white proof. Well, the research that they use to make that recommendation is exactly the same kind of research that they use to say that type 2 diabetes is caused by red meat or that heart disease is caused by red meat. It was observational epidemiological research, prospective cohort studies where they would follow a large amount of people. But there's all these biases that can get into that kind of research. There's healthy user bias that we talked about. There's the researcher's preconceived notion. What the researcher believes can actually leach into the research results if you don't blind the study. And that's why we talk about double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled, randomized controlled trials, is because you not only don't want the participant to know if they're getting the real thing or the placebo, you also don't want the researcher to know. There's a reason we do double-blinded studies, Jesse, and it's because not only will the participant cheat, the researcher will also cheat because at the end of the day, they're both just dudes and chicks. They're both just humans, and everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to be right, and everybody wants to get paid. That's just the truth of the matter, and that's not evil. That's just human nature. We all want to get paid and go home and have fun. Well, for a researcher, if they've got a hypothesis, you read the research enough, Jesse, to know that if you do a study that disproves your hypothesis, known as a negative study, you know how many of those get published in large, high-impact journals? Virtually none, right? Virtually none. Nobody wants to publish a negative study that didn't prove anything, right? They want to publish positive studies that have a high impact that people are going to go, wait, what? Then you can put an article in the New York Times saying red meat causes diabetes, and everybody will read that and click on your link. And you'll have your paper will be a super high impact paper, and you'll be famous and you'll get a raise. Yeah, researchers are susceptible to the same exact temptations as every other human on the planet. So we have to blind the researchers so they don't know either, especially when we're doing drug trials. Now, you can't really do double-blinded randomized controlled trials with food because people know whether they're eating bacon or whether it's not bacon. You can tell. And the researcher can tell from the smell whether it was bacon or placebo bacon. So you can't do that, but you can design studies that effectively tie the hands of the researcher, if not blind the researcher. Such as the study that I intimated earlier. Let's take 100 carnivores and 100 vegans and let's follow them for the next 5 years. It's going to be real hard to cheat there because if you try to give a carnivore broccoli, they're going to know. And they're going to say, no, I ain't eating that. And if you try to give a vegan bacon, they're going to say, no, I ain't eating that, right? It's hard to trip that study up. That's why I predict it'll never be done. Does that answer the question, or do we need to go further?
No, that's good. And it seems like, yeah, we've been debunking all these different myths when it comes to red meat.
Let me say this, Jesse. I'm sorry to interrupt, but let me say this. I'm not even trying to debunk a plant-based diet. I'm actually not even trying to promote a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet. I'm just saying, with regards to this study that everybody's hearing about right now, I'm just saying, not even as a scientist, just as a layman, don't come at me with an extraordinary claim unless you've got extraordinary evidence to back up that claim. I think that's a rational request that I think every human has a right to say, don't come at me with some extraordinary claim. Oh, drinking water's bad for me. Oh, breathing air is bad for me. Oh, eating red meat's bad for me. My species has been doing all three of those things for the same length of time. Don't come at me telling me that now water or air or red meat's bad for me unless you have some damn good research. Otherwise, you're wasting my time. At best, you're wasting my time. At worst, you're tricking me into eating the high carb, highly processed, highly inflammatory crap that's made by Kellogg's and Post and General Mills and Mondelez and PepsiCo and Coca-Cola. You're actually harming my health when you come at me with an extraordinary claim with no research to back that up. You're actually doing humanity a disservice. You're not doing anybody a service except for the big corporations who are now going to make everything out of plants and make $1 billion profit. Now, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, Jesse. I want to believe that everybody has good intentions. But at some point, when Harvard School of Public Health keeps coming at me and my patients and my followers with extraordinary claims that red meat is the devil, at some point, we all, as rational adults, have to go, what's their motive? Why are they doing that?
All right, so you've made it clear red meat is good. One word you've been using to describe red meat is fatty. So I want to talk more about that piece. Are we talking about, there's a variety of different cuts when it comes to steaks and different percentages of fat when it comes to ground beef.
Yeah.
How much fat are we talking and why is that piece important?
Yeah. So the two most satiating macronutrients, I don't think anybody would argue this, is protein and fats. And so many people they'll try to include more meat in their diet, but they'll eat only the leanest cuts. And so they wind up effectively eating a higher protein, high carb, but inadequate fat. And so they're hungry all the time. You're going to fail if your goal is weight loss, or if your goal is reversing type 2 diabetes. If you're hungry all the time, you're going to fail. You're not going to reach your goal. And so our it's very clear in the anthropological literature that we always ate the fat that came with the meat. We would go out of our way to get the fat around the eyeballs or the fat around the kidneys. This is documented time and time and time again in anthropological research. Now, it may sound gross to modern people. They're like, no, I only want it skinless. I don't even want the skin on my chicken breast, much less the fat around the eyeballs, Dr. Berry. I get it. I understand. But that's social programming. That's the social meme that you currently believe in. But healthy humans always eat the fat that comes with the meat. It also, if you're trying to lose weight, or you're trying to reverse fatty liver, or you're trying to reverse type 2 diabetes or hypertension, or the list goes on and on, if you have a goal, a health goal, then you've got to be satiated after your meals. You've got to be full, and you've got to stay full for many hours after your meal, right? You're not going to do that if you're eating a high carb, low protein diet. Even with lots of fat, you're still going to be munching all the time. That's basically the Pepsi Cola and Dorito and honey bun diet. High sugar, high fat. You're going to be hungry all the time. You're not getting enough protein. You're not being satiated. If you try to do a high carb, high protein diet, for most people, they're not going to be satiated. They're going to keep snacking. And every time you snack, what happens to your insulin level? Every time you put carbs or protein in your mouth, your insulin goes up, right? More with carbs, but still some with protein. So you got hyperinsulinemia. You're hungry all the time. You're having to eat snacks in between meals and a bedtime snack, and you're not losing the weight, or you're not lowering the A1C. The sweet spot is to eat an adequate protein, adequate fat diet, as low in carbohydrates as possible. Now, there's a ton of argument right now on Twitter and other places about, should it be high protein, adequate fat, or should it be high fat, adequate protein? What I tell people is I don't care. Try 90 days both ways, because you're going to discover what works best for your particular DNA on that normal distribution curve. I don't know if you fall here or right in the fat middle. I don't know. But you can find out yourself by doing 90 days of high protein, adequate fat, very low carb. If that works for you, huzzah, I love it. But if that doesn't work for you, then you're going to do 90 days of high fat, still adequate protein, very, very low carb. And one of those two is going to work for you and your health improvement, your health optimization goals, then you win. And therefore I win because my goal is for you to be healthy. That's why I do this each and every day. And so I don't care if it's high protein, adequate fat or high fat, adequate protein. Either one is infinitely better for you than high carb, shitty fat, moderate protein. That's the literal worst diet on the planet. And there's lots of vegan influencers saying, oh, there's lots of protein in plants. I think the research, again, is very clear in animal biology and human biology studies that plant protein is not as effective as animal protein. It's just not. I'm sorry. I wish it were. Having a fight on Twitter yesterday with a vegan who says that we make all the amino acids we need. We don't need to. There's no such thing as an essential amino acid. That we don't make. There's no essential vitamins. We can make all the vitamins. We just have to eat calories. Literally said that. And this is a registered dietitian. And I'm like, man, I don't know what planet you're from. But the planet I'm on and all the people that I'm trying to help, we know that we need to have adequate amino acids from protein and adequate fatty acids from fat and adequate minerals and adequate vitamins, or our health is going to suffer. We just know this. How you don't know this, I'm not sure, but there are people out there like that.
Well, you've made it clear for people, it's an individual thing when it comes to the protein and fat. We need to experiment, find out the ratio best for us. But to get into the nuance for you when it comes to fatty meat, are you avoiding steaks, say, that are a leaner cut? Are you adding, say, like butter on top of your fatty steak to increase the fat? I'm just trying to get into the nuance of what that looks like for you.
Yeah. And so for me, I'm the guy over here on this end of the curve that fattens very easily. I was 297 pounds at my fattest. I developed type 2 diabetes very easily. I had severe prediabetes and didn't even know it because I was just living my life as an ER doc and as a family doctor. And so I have to follow a high fat, adequate protein, super low carbohydrate diet to keep all my health markers, all those markers I talked about previously, to keep those all normal. I have to follow that diet. And so I'll have a fatty ribeye. I've got a friend who's a butcher. I've got a friend who's a meat processor. And not everybody can afford that, and you don't have to do that. We'll talk about how expensive your meat needs to be in a second if you want to, Jesse. But I tell my butcher, never trim the fat. I want the fat that comes with the pork chop, the fat that comes with the ribeye. And in some cases, I'll get a giant ribeye and it's got a cap of fat on it that's 1.5 inches thick. My lamb chops have a 3/4 inch fat cap on them. If you trim the fat on my meat, you're no longer my butcher. And he's well aware of that. And so I have to have that fat in order to stay satiated, because if not, I'll be in here in the cabinets at 8 p.m. rummaging around trying to find a snack. My markers of inflammation will be going up. My A1C will be starting to creep up. My triglycerides will start to creep up very quickly if I don't eat enough protein and enough saturated fat, animal fat, to keep me satiated and to keep me from wanting to snack. I've been a snacker my entire life. And I discovered my prediabetes, 8-9 years ago, and started out trying to reverse it with primal paleo. That helped a tiny bit, not much. Keto, 80% of all my problems gone. Carnivore, fixed it and kept it fixed for 5.5 years now. So that, for me personally, that's what it has to be. And for the vast majority of people who come to either keto, ketovore, carnivore with their primary goal being weight loss, they have to do high fat, adequate protein. That's the sweet spot for them to lose the stored fat. And for so many people, I know somebody right now listening to this, their head is exploding. They're like, this doctor just said to eat more fat to lose fat. How the hell does that make sense? And when you really dig into the human physiology, it does make sense. Because the ultimate goal here is to be satiated, to not be hungry constantly, and to have a very low insulin level in your blood. When your insulin level gets to a low enough point, you start to burn body fat effortlessly. You don't even have to exercise. We've got people who have lost 200 pounds who are paraplegics in a wheelchair, and they don't exercise at all. And we have people who come to the conferences all the time saying, I thought you were full of crap because I weighed 450 pounds. And you said, I watched The Biggest Loser. They're on the treadmill. Everybody I watch, they're like, oh, you've got to exercise or you're going to fail. I just literally sat in my recliner for a year and ate beef, butter, bacon, and eggs. And I lost 200 pounds of fat. And I know it was fat because some of these people have the financial means to get a DEXA scan or to get a full body MRI. And guess what was preserved while they lost 200 pounds of stored body fat? Their bone density was preserved. Their muscle density and their muscle percentage was preserved on a diet of nothing but beef, butter, bacon, and eggs, and then maybe liver, some kind of liver, one serving a week. They lost almost no muscle, but they lost this extraordinary amount of fat, not exercising. And in some cases, a few of them even put on muscle, even though they weren't exercising. It's almost like that when you're eating fatty meat, your body understands what you're doing, and you'll start to put on not a Arnold Schwarzenegger amount of muscle, but you'll start to actually increase your muscle strength and density and your muscle percentage to a certain degree, because your body understands, oh, you're getting healthy again. You're getting ready to hunt. I need to get you in shape. Now, obviously, to have show muscle, you're going to have to lift weights. Everybody knows that. I'm not implying that you can have show muscles sitting in the recliner eating beef, butter, bacon, and eggs, but I'm just telling you what we've seen. We've seen black and white studies again and again and again from people sharing their lab work with us, sharing their DEXA scans, sharing their MRIs if they can afford that. Yeah, you can do that without exercise, and then now let's talk about the price of the meat. There's a subset of carnivores, subset of health gurus out there that say you're going to destroy your health unless you only eat grass-fed, grass-finished, that's been only grazed on the slopes of the Himalayan mountains from the month of March to May. That's the only kind of beef you can eat. It costs $200 a pound, but that's you. And also I sell that. You can get a box from me once a month of that panda massage meat. No. Is grass-finished beef a little bit better than feedlot beef? Yes, it is. It's anywhere from 3 to 6% better with regards to the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, to the omega-3 profile. It's going to have more vitamins and minerals, but is it a deal breaker for somebody who cannot afford $22 an ounce beef? No, it's not. We've had hundreds of people, Jesse, in our private group lose almost 100 pounds, if not more, eating the big 5-pound sticks of the cheapest beef that you can buy at the discount grocery. And it's not, there's nothing magic in any of the beef. That's the thing, people, once they get that paradigm shift, they're like, oh, I get it. So grass finished is better, but it's not mandatory. I can eat any beef. Like literally, I've had people lose almost 100 pounds eating Spam and hot dogs and bologna because they chose the lowest carb version with the fewest added things. They try to get just pure meat, hot dogs, pure meat bologna. And Spam's going to have some carbs in it, but not many. If you compare it to Lucky Charms or Doritos or Pepsi Cola, it's very low carb. And so if previously they were eating a junk diet and they start just literally eating nothing but eggs, bologna, hot dogs, and Spam, they'll lose weight like crazy because they're keeping that insulin level down low, much lower than it was when they were eating the Lucky Charms and the Doritos. They'll lose all that stored fat. They'll lose the fat stored in their liver and in their pancreas. They'll start to lose the visceral fat. And then guess what happens, Jesse, after a few months of losing that weight while sitting in the recliner? All of a sudden, they feel like doing something that they haven't felt like doing in sometimes decades. You know what it is? Exercise. They actually feel like exercising, and I don't have to yell at them and berate them and belittle them to get them to exercise. They'll pop up and say, guess what I did yesterday? I went and walked a mile. It's the first time in 20 years. It was amazing. I didn't think I'd ever be able to do that again. Thank you so much. And it's not because of any magic that I'm performing. It's just because they finally honored their species. They honored their physiology. They honored their biochemistry by eating a proper human diet. And as soon as you start to do that, your body, no matter how sick it is currently, immediately it says, thank you. I'll get to work healing now. It's literally that simple.
And you can see how once you start to make, some of these steps, inertia is going to start building. You're going to start to feel physically better, mentally better. The weight's going to fall off. You're going to begin exercising. And as you continue to learn and add new things in, you're going to get better and better, break this cycle that was going the other way, and then get your life back.
Absolutely. We've got people who 2 years ago, they were in a wheelchair most of the day. They could stand up, but they literally would just transfer from the wheelchair to the toilet, wheelchair to the couch. When they went to the grocery, they were the person in the scooter. They were that sick and that obese, who now reach out to us in our private group, and they're telling me how many 40-yard sprints that they did yesterday. Now, can you imagine the feeling of pride for somebody who used to literally have trouble transferring from a wheelchair to the toilet, had to have help doing that? They're now out in the backyard doing wind sprints. If you could go back in time and tell that person, 3 years from now, you're going to be doing wind sprints in the backyard, they'd probably try their best to slap you because they would think you were mocking them. That kind of transformation is absolutely possible. It's happening every day when you honor your physiology and your biochemistry and you eat a proper human diet. Your body will go back depending on how much permanent damage you've done, right? We always have to say, well, you smoked for 40 years. You drank a fifth of whiskey a day for 40 years. You lived on Pepsi, Cheetos, and Ding Dongs for 40 years. You've probably done some permanent damage. But the degree with which the body can heal, it's just almost miraculous when you stop the slow poison that is the standard Western diet and start eating a proper human diet. The degree of healing sometimes is almost miraculous, and it makes me want to tear up every time I hear one of those, because that's what I used to dream about doing, Jesse, back when I was 12 years old, watching reruns of MASH and Trapper John MD and Quincy MD and dreaming about being a doctor. I wanted to heal people. I wanted to transform people from sick to well. And I now get to do that on a daily basis. Not because of some invention of mine, but because with many other people, we've just kind of stumbled around in the dark until we've rediscovered what a proper human diet is. And then when we recommend that to somebody, and then the next step is they actually listen and say, okay, this sounds crazy, but I'm going to try it for 90 days. That's it. That's when the seeming magic happens. Because at the end of that 90 days, the vast majority of people say, I'm never going back to the way I used to eat. That would be suicide, effectively, if I went back to eating that way. And most people are not suicidal. They'd actually like to be healthy if it is indeed possible.
And the great thing about all this is that it's approachable for everybody. You've already you've gotten into the details of the fact that it doesn't need to be this pristine, high quality meat for people that can't afford it. And it's a very simple diet. You're telling people eat more meat, cut down the carbs. Like, this is very approachable.
Yep.
It's very simplified, and people really, I can't think of any excuses for people that have been struggling not to give this a try.
Exactly. And indeed, that's what we see is the only people who don't do this are the people who are just not mentally ready. They've got a ton of crap going on in their life. They're just so depressed they can barely get off the couch. They're just not ready to make any change. But the instant that somebody is like, okay, fine, I'll try this for 30 days. I'll do 60. I'll do 90. When they make that commitment, that's when the seeming magic begins, which is just physiology working in the background. But after they see what that 30 days did, what that 60 or 90 days did, they're sold. And then they're the carnivore evangelist out trying to convince their mother-in-law, you got to try this. This is amazing. And it annoys people. But you can just imagine if you literally thought the remainder of your life was going to be short and miserable and full of doctor's visits and full of handfuls of pills for the rest of your life, and now you're in the backyard running wind sprints, You're off all your medicines. You had to buy all new clothes because nothing you had fits anymore. You sold your wheelchair on eBay. When you go to the supermarket now, you don't care if there's a available scooter or not because you don't need that. How could you not shout that from the rooftops? Of course, you're going to be trying to get everybody you care about to give this a 90-day try because you know what it did for you.
Ken, as somebody who in the past has had their own struggle with weight loss, what would you say to somebody who comes up to you today and says, I've tried everything. This weight is just stuck on me. I've tried all the popular diets. I've tried fasting. I've tried it all, but I feel stuck. I feel like it's just me. What would you say to them?
Well, the first thing I would say is you are not alone. You are in very, very good company, and you're in numerous company. The vast majority of us have been completely misled when it comes to what actually is a proper human diet. And I hope we can dive deep into that subject. But I myself was deluded as a doctor who did get some nutrition training in medical school. I had no idea at the time when I became severely obese. Back then we called it morbidly obese. I became pre-diabetic. Had all these chronic medical problems, and I thought that was just a product of getting old. I was in my mid-30s. But I felt very old at that time. And so I would say, yes, I know that you have tried many of the popular diets. And I would also like to add that I know you've diligently tried those diets. I no longer accuse people of, well, you just half-assed did this. You're sitting on the couch eating Doritos. You're not really trying. In the past, I would have accused you of that because I thought that losing weight, getting healthy was just a product of move more, eat less. And that didn't work for me. And I think that we're seeing that it doesn't truly work for millions of people around the world in modern societies. It just doesn't work for the vast majority of us. So I would say, I know that you've tried. I know that you've really put in the effort, but you were given the wrong information. And most people, when they hear that, are relieved. Like, oh my God, I thought I was just a lazy glutton. Maybe there is hope. And yes, my answer is 100% there is hope. When you discover where you fall on the proper human diet spectrum, all of a sudden, things that seemed impossible to you before suddenly become possible and even probable. And the sun comes out and you're like, oh, okay. So I've been doing this wrong the entire time. Not because I'm dumb, not because I'm lazy, not because I'm a glutton, but just because I was given the wrong information.
Well, I think a big part of the problem too is there's so much conflicting information when it comes to diet. So like you said, people have been trying and they've probably been trying on these different diets over the years and are feeling exhausted at this point because so many of these diets that quote unquote work are on opposite ends of the spectrum. So I think a good jumping off place, you mentioned the proper human diet a couple times there. Let's talk about that template and we can dive into various aspects as we're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. But first, let's touch on, you said something very important. People are frustrated. People have just given up. And there's a thing in animal biology that happens in all mammals of any species, and that's called learned helplessness. If you frustrate an animal enough times, including humans, they just give up. This is well known in the psychological literature. And so this has happened to literally millions of people, Jesse. They just have given up. They're like, screw it. I guess I'm just big boned. I guess I'm just fat. I don't know. But again, I want to reiterate that no. You were just using the wrong template, even if it was endorsed by a very prominent, famous organization or association like the American Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association, the American Medical Association, Eat Lancet. I could go on and on and on with all these organizations because very often they have other interests as their main interest. Their main interest is not you getting healthy and optimizing your health and realizing your best true health where you feel good and you're happy to get out of bed every day. So yes, your frustration does not mean that you're a failure. It does not mean that there is no answer. It just means you haven't found the proper answer for you yet.
And you touched on something there that brought up another aspect of this for me. It's the fact that you have to actually be doing the research on your own these days and deep diving in to really learn what the proper human diet is. And that also layers on to what I mentioned before, the fact that there is conflicting information. So not only do you have to do the research, you have to sift through conflicting information. So there's a lot of variables against people. We've stated that up front. Let's get right into the meat and potatoes and talk about what this proper human diet is for people.
I have a few basic principles of a proper human diet that I talk about on my YouTube channel and other social media. So I think by definition, a proper human diet. Now, let me just add, Jesse, up front, this is not just from my limited training on nutrition in medical school. That basically taught me nothing useful when it comes to the caring and feeding of just someone out in the wild, which this is our wild, as weird as that may be. That's what this is. Whatever, if you live in an urban, suburban, or even if you're out in the country, that's your wild. That you are still a wild animal, and you are somewhat domesticated, unfortunately, but this is our current wild. And so by definition, based on years of studying the anthropological data, paleoanthropological data, reading text from explorers and researchers from the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, and early 1900s, it becomes pretty obvious, these basic principles. And so this is where I've gleaned all this from, not just from reading the latest nutrition research, because you won't find any of this there. So number one, a proper human diet is by definition ancestrally appropriate. And for the average doctor or nutritionist who has not dipped their toe into the anthropological literature, into the paleoanthropological literature, this literally, not only do they not know what it says, they don't even understand how important that really is. And it's super, super important to know the diets that basically brought us, that helped us evolve into this apex species that runs the planet currently, for better or for worse. I understand. But that's very, very important, because if you want to be a cow rancher, you have to know what a proper cow diet is, or you will fail as a cow rancher, right? If you want to raise broccoli, you have to know what a proper broccoli diet is. What do you feed your broccoli, or you will go bankrupt as a broccoli farmer. And so when you get into animal biology, which that's my undergraduate degree, there's no debate. There's no doubt. We've known for hundreds of years what a proper cow diet is. If you want the cow to be healthy, you feed them this. If you want the cow to be super fatty, which is what the current preference for humans, and I think there's a paleoanthropological reason why we want all of our animals to be fatty and have fatty muscle and fatty liver, which we can get into, you feed them this other diet. And that same exact concept applies to humans as well. You have to know what is the species-specific diet for humans over the last 3.5 million years. Now, we've been on this planet as a species for about 350,000 years. But our ancestors, long before that, were already eating this proper human diet. The next concept is that a proper human diet is nutrient dense. The entire reason you eat food is for nutrition. Now, many of us may eat food out of boredom, because of social pressure, family pressure, etc. But the real, true reason, the biological reason that you eat food, is to glean nutrition. Amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals. And let me say, Jesse, that those are the only essential nutrients they are. We hear lots about polyphenols, we hear lots about fiber, but in reality, those are not essential nutrients. They might be helpful, maybe. Anytime you say might, you also have to remember that also means might not. If you say may, that also equals may not. So you have to keep that in mind as well when you're talking about a proper human diet. I think that the next principle of a proper human diet is that it is by definition a lower carbohydrate diet. And I think that we see this in modern society with epidemics of type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, and obesity. These people are just eating too many carbohydrates for their personal physiology. Now, some people can tolerate more carbohydrates than others. It's a known concept in evolutionary science that in any population of a species, there's going to be variability. This is how, if something changes, we're not all wiped out immediately. And so some people can tolerate up to 100 total grams of carbohydrates a day and still be very metabolically healthy, mentally healthy, physically healthy. Other people need to turn down what I call the carbohydrate intake knob down to 50 total grams a day. Some people need to turn down the knob even more to 20. And for some people like me who fatten very easily and develop prediabetes very easily, I have to keep the carbohydrate intake knob turned down as low as I possibly can, which is a carnivore diet. And there are several other principles of a proper human diet, but I think those are the main caveats. One final one I would add is that a proper human diet is by definition uninflammatory. And so this is where you get into some of that interpersonal variability. Some people may be able to eat kale and broccoli and Brussels sprouts a pound a day, and it's wonderful. They have no symptoms. Other people, if they eat one Brussels sprout, they're going to have 3 days of abdominal bloating and gas and abdominal discomfort. And so that variability within the species, which I love to talk about, the normal distribution curve. And you know what that is, Jesse, but just to quickly explain, out of any population of people, there are some people that can eat the hell out of veg, and it's fine. Most people in the population, if they eat too much veg, they're going to have bloating, they're going to have a skin issue, they're going to have joint issues, mental health degradation, they're going to have something. And then some people over on this end of that normal distribution curve need to avoid all the veg. And I don't really have problem with inflammation from vegetables. I have problems with too many carbohydrates from the vegetables. And so you not only have to think about the low carbohydrate, but you have to think about the uninflammatory as well. And with those 4 basic principles of a proper human diet, I think that the vast majority of people, 80%, maybe a little more, can immediately start to turn around the number on the bathroom scale. They can start to immediately reverse their elevated hemoglobin A1C or their elevated triglycerides. They can start to reverse their fatty liver. They can start to lower their blood pressure, and many other health markers immediately start to move back towards the normal range when they honor these principles.
You talked about the difference between people, and I think that's an important concept here. And I assume when you say that, you're talking from a genetic perspective, but I also want to layer on too, there's time of life perspective. So, we're going to go through different phases of life, and as we get older, our metabolism's going to naturally slow down. And also activity level. Somebody who is, out there exercising every day might be able to tolerate more carbohydrates than somebody who is more sedentary. So there's different variables that all mesh together to form this individual situation that you talk about.
Yeah, and there's several layers. I think genetics does play a role. This is greatly overhyped, especially by people who are selling genetic testing. You cannot just check your genetic code and say, aha, I should avoid onions and I should eat more, brassicas. No, that does not work that way. The second layer is epigenetics. And this is where a lot of people get hung up, because what your mom ate when you were in the womb, that matters epigenetically. What you were fed the first few years of your life matters epigenetically. And I think we see this in people on a ketogenic or a carnivore diet. They make wonderful gains in weight loss up to a point. And so even though their weight is not where they want it, all their metabolic markers are perfect, but yet they're holding this excess adipose tissue that they'd love to get rid of. And for many of them, that's their primary goal, right, Jesse? But they're like, I've lost 80 pounds and all my metabolic numbers are beautiful, but I can't lose this last 30, 40, 50 pounds. It's stuck. Now, sometimes it's an undiagnosed medical condition delaying that, but I think in some cases, it's your epigenetics. It's what your mom ate. It's what she fed you when you were very young, and it may even go back another generation, Jesse. So that's why one of the reasons why we need to give ourselves some grace, because in some cases, your epigenetic switches were thrown before you even conscious. Now, the question then immediately is, can we unflip those epigenetic switches? And I think that we can to some degree, but I think that that you're not able to turn them off nearly as quickly as we'd like. In many cases, I think it takes months or years to calm your body's inflammation down and to calm your body's worry that, oh my God, we're losing fat too fast, right? And so your body will just put on the brakes and not allow any further fat metabolism until your body is satisfied. Okay, I guess everything's okay now. And then it'll say, okay, it's fine to lose a little more fat, because everybody needs to keep in mind that only in modern times, only in the last 200 years, out of our 3.5 million years of existence on this planet, our ancestors, only in the last 100 or 200 years has it become advantageous to lose fat. Never before in human history was that a good thing. It was always a bad omen if you were losing your body fat. Now, your body, as far as we know, does not know how overweight you are. It doesn't, because that's not something it ever had to contend with in the past, right? And so your body doesn't know if you're holding 10 pounds or 500 pounds of stored fat. It really can't tell as far as we know. Now, that could change with more research. And so, but anytime your body fat percentage is plummeting, as it will on a ketovore, carnivore diet, your body freaks out, because in all of our past, that was a bad thing. Either you were infected with something and couldn't hunt and gather, or you had an injury and you couldn't hunt and gather. Maybe your tribe kicked you out and you're on your own now. Maybe you fell in a hole and you broke your ankle and you can't get out. Always that was a bad thing. Only in the last century or two has it become a good thing to lose quite a bit of stored body fat. And then I think you're absolutely right. Your age in life matters. That's another layer of complexity. So when I was 18, Jesse, I could literally live on chocolate milk, Doritos, and Ding Dongs, and could not gain weight. Literally could not gain weight in my teens and 20s. Tried to put on muscle. My body was like, sure, skinny boy. Yeah, keep trying. That's not going to work. But about 32 to 37, my body said, oh, okay, you want to gain some weight? Here we go. And so I think time of life does absolutely matter. And I think back to the carbohydrate knob, the younger you are, the more total carbohydrates you can handle on average. The older you get, you need to probably be turning down that carbohydrate intake knob, or your waistline will suffer because of that. And then finally, exercise activity level is absolutely another layer. When you're younger, this matters less. As you get older, it matters more. And for a multitude of reasons. First and foremost, if you want to burn that stored fat, you're probably going to have to increase your activity level, not because exercising will help you burn that fat. The research is very clear in nutrition and medicine that exercise is a terrible method for burning fat, for losing fat. But, when people say they want to lose weight, what do they really mean? They want to lose fat. They don't want to lose muscle. They don't want to lose bone density. They don't want to lose connective tissue. They don't want to lose brain, liver, kidney, heart. They want to lose fat. And so exercise indirectly can help raise your metabolic level and help with that, but it's not going to directly help you lose weight. And then there's probably other layers of complexity that you have to layer on top of this to get what your proper human diet is for this moment in time.
To get a little bit more nuanced into that exercise piece, how do you feel about, I assume you're talking more from, say, like a cardio perspective and trying to, jog or go for a bike ride and burn off calories, in that period of time. But there is a lot of research showing that putting on muscle is a good thing when it comes to losing weight. So can we get into the nuances just to decipher between the two?
Yep. I think that chronic cardio, as my friend Mark Sisson has called it, is probably a uniformly either a bad thing or at least not a good thing. I don't think anybody should be spending an hour on the treadmill, the Stairmaster, jogging for hours. I think that is the health benefits are trivial and the risk of injury is very high. I don't think your time is well spent doing that. I think building muscle and strengthening your bones are excellent signals to your body that we need to be healthier. We need to get healthier. And if that involves burning some fat, that's fine. But especially to the older population, if you're especially over the age of 50, you don't need to be focusing on chronic cardio. You need to be focusing on lifting heavy things, running fast, biking fast, swimming fast for short intervals of time. I'm a huge fan of high intensity interval training. I think that's probably the way for everybody because, first of all, it doesn't waste a ton of time. Secondly, you can do it for free. So that's two very big, important things for this country boy with ADHD. I got to be able to do it fast. I got to not spend a lot of money. I got to not have to be put out. I don't want to have to drive to the gym and wait in line for the staff. I'm not doing any of that stuff. And so stuff that you can do at home for free that's going to give you immediate results. I'm a huge fan of that. And so I think that building muscle and building bone and all of the downstream ripple effects that gives your body and your brain, very important, the brain, you're going to improve your mental health and your physical health, but you're also setting yourself up to be that healthy, enviable elderly person one day because you're going to be elderly. You're either going to be elderly or you're going to be dead. That's your two options. There is no third option currently. Maybe my friend Dr. Sinclair will have a breakthrough moment and discover something. But right now, you're going to get old. And so you either get old and you look great and all your friends are envious and you feel amazing, or you get old and you're in a wheelchair or just permanently on the couch. Those are your two options. And so at some point, if you've lost enough bone strength and you've lost enough muscle mass, you're basically infirm. You're basically an invalid. You're basically there might be a point at which there's no return from that. And so I love when people get active. And what I have found in my years of doing this, both in my private practice and also online, is that very many people, especially if they're very inflamed and very obese, when they start trying to get healthy, exercise is not an option. If you weigh 350 pounds, I don't want you to go to the gym and jog. I also don't want you to try to go in the backyard and run wind sprints. You need to focus 100% of your effort, your motivation, your persistence, and your money on your food. Fix your food, fix your diet. And because at some point, when you've done that well enough, for long enough, the levels of inflammation will go down and your brain will be more motivated to do things and your body will be capable of doing those things. And it's very common for somebody who's just miserable when they start this way of eating. After a few months of this, they're like, you know what I did yesterday? I went for a walk. I haven't done that in years. It's almost like we're hardwired to go outside and play, but not if we're miserable and sick and overweight. Nobody wants to go outside and play in that condition. But when you've healed your metabolism enough and you've improved the health of your body, both mentally and physically, all of a sudden you return to this innate desire to go outside and play. And that's exactly how I talk about it. And I think that's how people should think about it. What do you enjoy doing? What do you want to do? Go do that and do it a little more aggressively each day or each week. Build your muscle, build your bones.
Let's talk about the diet piece from that perspective of somebody that's obese or type 2 diabetic. So they have a ton of extra weight on them. You mentioned quickly there the fact that they don't want to focus on exercise in the beginning. And we've talked about the knob for carbohydrates and you've given the spectrum of different dietary options. But let's talk to that person that's really determined right now and they want to make big dietary changes. It sounds like carnivore would be the move for that person because it's the most extreme the one way. But for somebody that is just getting into this, there might be something for doing it more gradual. So what I'm getting at is for the beginner, somebody who is going to make a big dietary switch, at least in the long run, how do they begin to move down that continuum?
Great question. So first and foremost, you need to understand the reason that Nisha, my wife, and I named this a proper human diet is because we don't want there to be any misconception that this is a weight loss diet or this is a quick fix. There is no such thing, okay, in reality. We'd love for there to be, but there is no such thing. What you have to come into this understanding is this is the way I'm going to eat for the rest of my life. This is a proper human diet. This is a species-specific diet for me. This is how I should have been eating all along. And many people say, well, how long do I have to do this before I can, add some, and what they mean is junk back in. It's like, well, you can add junk back in anytime you're ready to start slowly poisoning yourself again. But I would highly recommend you stick to a proper human diet for the rest of your life if you'd like to live a proper human life, which means you're virile, vigorous, potent, mentally acute, mentally alert, aggressive when it's called for, patient and stoic when that's called for. All those things become much easier when your body's not inflamed and your brain's not inflamed. And so for many people, they'll jump right in, full bore carnivore. I don't advise against that. I think the carnivore diet is the most excellent elimination diet on the planet. But for many people, they don't need to do that, because if they do that, they'll fail. And there's several reasons for that. Probably the most prominent reason is carbohydrate withdrawal symptoms. And so many people think that the standard American diet, there's nothing really wrong about that. I'm just eating too much. There's nothing bad about that. I've just been a glutton. My contention is, no, there are several things that are bad about the standard American diet. When you go to the middle of the grocery store and you buy food from the middle aisles, which is where they put the food that they make the highest profit on, there are several things about that are unhealthy by definition. Maybe not by design, but by definition, they're unhealthy. They're inflammatory, and they're high in carbohydrates. They're full of either naturally occurring or added sugar. They're full of grains, which every human on the planet has some degree of inflammatory response to any of the grains, without exception. Or they've got vegetable seed oils, which human beings have only been eating for the last 100 years. And so again, back to that ancestral component, never in our history has the predominant fat in our diet been a vegetable seed oil or a plant butter or any of that kind of crap. That is a new technology that is being experimented in humans with. And I think we're seeing the results of that experiment with the epidemics of obesity, fatty liver, hypertension, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes. And so I think some people should come into this slower. Maybe they should dip their toe into low carb and try to keep their total carbohydrates under 100 total grams of carbs a day, not net carbs, because people who make highly palatable foods, they want to talk about net carbs because they know they can hide lots of carbohydrates in that calculation. So count total carbs and really try to focus on one ingredient, whole real foods. That's real food. That's what we've eaten for millions of years, not processed stuff that came from a factory, not powdered stuff. And so then after a while on low carb, you can go to 50 total grams a day or less. You can kind of move around on that spectrum once you've gotten in there, but you need to realize that spectrum is where human health is. If you want human health, that's where it's at. It's not the latest fad diet. And so whether you come at this full bore or whether you come at this in a graduated fashion, like I'm going to do low carb for a couple of months, then I'm going to try keto, see how it goes. Either of those is a fine strategy depending on your personality. I think that's very important as well. But realize that carbohydrate withdrawal symptoms is a very real thing. Sugar addiction withdrawal symptoms is a very real thing. And so most people have somewhere between 3 and 14 days of flu-like symptoms when they cut the carbs out, especially the highly processed carbs, because they are addicted to that. They have used those highly processed foods as a dopamine hit for long enough, for enough years, that when they stop eating those foods and they have that swing in dopamine levels, you can feel kind of blah, feel kind of down, feel kind of just not good. You can have all of the withdrawal symptoms that you would have if you were stopping smoking or you were stopping alcohol or you were stopping some other illicit drug. You will have body aches. You could feel like you're coming down with the flu. You could have trouble sleeping, or you could be somnolent during the daytime. You can have mental fogginess, all these things. And so people name this the keto flu. I think that's a misnomer. I think you should call it what it is, carbohydrate withdrawal symptoms. Anybody who's tried keto is like, I couldn't do that. I felt like crap. Get on the internet and look up what are the symptoms of nicotine withdrawal? What are the symptoms of alcohol withdrawal? And what you're going to find is that your carbohydrate addiction withdrawal symptoms mimic that list almost exactly. You're going to be irritable. You're going to be grumpy. You're not going to feel good, all those things. And I think that is for many people, that's a wake-up call. When they're like, I don't think I'm addicted to Lucky Charms. I just think I like them a lot, right? But when you stop them and you go through this period of, damn, I'm literally withdrawing from Lucky Charms and all the other foods that the American Diabetes Association and the Tufts School of Nutrition tell me are really good foods. I'm actually withdrawing from them. That's probably not a good sign that they're actually the proper food for me. And so if people know that going in, Jesse, they know that up front, I'm probably going to withdraw from this. Then they're prepared for that. They're also not misled by influencers out there who would love to say, see, that's not good for you. See how bad you feel? You need to get off this immediately. You need to go back to eating the foods that I endorse and the highly processed, protein bar, which is really a carbohydrate bar. You need to go back to eating that. And because as soon as you go back to eating that, you'll feel better again. And you will feel better again because that's well known in the addiction model. That if someone who hasn't smoked for 4 days, they're going to feel like crap. But if they smoke a cigarette, guess what? They feel better. Does that mean they should just give up and go back to smoking? Of course not. The alcoholic, after 3 days of no alcohol at all, is going to feel yucky. Does that mean they should go back to drinking so they feel better? Obviously, the answer is no. And so many people aren't aware of the carbohydrate sugar addiction model. But once they get that under their belt, and once they understand this is a way of eating, this is lifelong. If you want good health until being very, very, very old, you need to eat this way. When you get those two concepts under your belt, all of a sudden, this becomes almost self-evident. This is the way I need to eat, and I need to push through those carbohydrate withdrawal symptoms. Push through those for 3 to 14 days until I get on the other side of those symptoms. Because on the other side of those symptoms, that's where good health is.
So other than giving people the heads up that they're going to likely suffer with these carb withdrawals and going slow into cutting back the carbs, anything else they can do if they are making this dietary switch to ease that period of time?
Yeah. So make sure that you're getting plenty of electrolytes and minerals. Make sure that you're getting plenty of salt. I'm not a big endorser of products because I'm not here to make $1 million. I'm here to try to improve the metabolic health of 1 million people. But these two I do talk about sometimes because they will give you the electrolytes and the minerals that your body needs. That will decrease the symptoms of carbohydrate withdrawal. It's not going to eliminate them, but it's going to make them less severe. Getting plenty of salt in your diet. And I've got multiple YouTube videos talking about salt's not bad for you. If you salt your food to taste, there's going to be no negative health effects from that. Every mammal on the planet, without exception, seeks out salt and preferentially will lick certain muds or certain rocks that are high in sodium and chloride. These things are mandatory for proper mammalian health. You have to have salt, and this is one of the reasons people on a low salt or no salt diet feel miserable, is because their body is suffering because they don't have enough salt. But for the carbohydrate withdrawal, get plenty of electrolytes, get plenty of minerals, get plenty of salt, get plenty of sleep, of course. Try to be a little more active, always keeping in mind where you're at on your journey. And then eat when you're hungry and eat until you're full. A proper human diet allows you to do those things. And for many people out there, they're like, no, dude, you don't understand. If you tell me to eat until I'm full, I'll weigh 800 pounds. Yeah, eating the highly processed crap, you will. Yes, definitely. But eating a proper human diet that adheres to all the principles of a proper human diet, you now get to eat until you're comfortably stuffed, just like every other wild mammal on the planet does on a daily basis, whether food is scarce or whether food is plentiful. They never get obese unless it is part of their annual cycle where they're going to go into hibernation. Then what do? They up the carb intake. They up the sugar intake so they can develop fatty liver on purpose, develop a thick layer of body fat on purpose, and then go into hibernation. That's literally the only mammals on the planet that become obese if they're eating a species-specific diet, right? Now, if they have access to human garbage dumps, they can get really fat. But if they're eating their proper ancestral diet, they don't get obese unless it serves their needs as a species on an annual basis.
Let's come back to our vegans. And there is this group of people, and pretty large group of people online, that are on a plant-based only diet, which typically is pretty high carb. There is a group of them that are apparently doing very well on that diet when it comes to health and wellness. What do you think that is? Is it just short-term gains and then eventually things are going to dwindle? Or is it going from a standard type diet and this being an upgrade from that?
It's all that.
Like,
And
let's address what's going on there with these people that apparently are getting healthier on that diet.
absolutely. And I tell people all the time on social media, changing from a standard American junk diet to a vegan diet, that is a step in the right direction. It's the first step towards a proper human diet. And I love it when somebody goes vegan. I absolutely applaud them and I'm proud of them, because that means they're thinking about food, Jesse. That means they're actually thinking before they consume. That's the biggest first step, I think. When you start to think about your food, you're a different person at that point. Then every morsel, you're like, wait a minute, what is this? That's good. That's a great first step. Now, if there's actually a study done by Neil Bernard, who's a noted vegan. He's got his own little agent, the Physicians Committee for Truth or something. I don't know about the truth part, but
responsible medicine.
That's it. Responsible medicine. Yeah, I don't know about the responsible part, but he actually did a study that showed that people, when they adopted a vegan diet, their A1C improved. And for many people, that's absolutely the case. Their A1C may start out being 9 or 8. When they go on a whole food, plant-based vegan diet, it'll come down, but it'll only come down to 7 or 6.5, right? And so he published that study. He was proud of that. And I just tweeted yesterday, if the carnivore diet would only get your A1C down to 6.5 or 7, I would be ashamed. I definitely wouldn't publish that. I'd be looking for a new job. I'd be like, well, if that's as good as it does, I don't want to be associated with that. But he actually published that. And so, yes, a vegan diet can lower your A1C, but you will seldom see a vegan who was previously type 2 diabetic. They're very shy about sharing their current A1C because it's typically still elevated. It's still 5.9, 6.5, 6.9. It did come down from 14 because they stopped all the highly processed, just abject junk carbohydrates, and they started to eat much more complex carbohydrates. That slowed down the glucose uptake. There's a lot more fiber. Therefore, they're not eating as much non-fibrous carbohydrates. Yeah, and their A1C went from 11 down to 7 or 7.5. That is an improvement, absolutely, but you're not normal. You still have type 2 diabetes, or you still have bad pre-diabetes. And then one thing you'll never see the vegan share is their fasting insulin. And also, you'll never hear the vegan cardiologists. They won't even reply to a comment about fasting insulin. They won't even justify it because I think they know that if you start checking fasting insulins, you're going to see immediately that, yeah, their A1C came down from 11 to 7.5, but their insulin is still sky high. And I'm sorry, but that's not the solution. I want the A1C to be normal, and I want the fasting insulin to be normal too, because that's the numbers you see when you check a hunter-gatherer population who's super, super healthy and they have no heart disease whatsoever. Both of them are normal, and you can't have them both normal. On the most well-balanced, well-formulated vegan diet, you're going to have hyperinsulinemia in anybody over the age of 30. They're either going to be in starvation mode where they're literally just not eating enough food and they're very frail. They've got osteopenia. Their teeth are getting loose. Their skin is saggy and looks terrible. If they're actually eating enough food, they're going to have hyperinsulinemia. And we saw a huge pushback from the vegan cardiology community on Twitter when we started recommending continuous glucose monitors. It's like you need a CGM, and you want to keep that line as normal for as many hours a day as possible. And they were in an uproar, Jesse. They're like, you don't need that. This is gonna cause eating disorders. It's like, what are you talking about? People wanting to have a normal blood sugar. That's an eating disorder now. I don't think so. I think that's people being interested in their health, motivated to improve their health. I think that's a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing in any way. And you get pushback immediately, or typically you get ignored if you talk about a fasting insulin level because they know it's going to be high. And then how are they going to explain to their patient, well, yeah, you're not as severe a type 2 diabetic now as you were. You're on 3 diabetic medications and your fasting insulin is also high. They don't want to have that conversation. So they just pretend like fasting insulin doesn't exist. And it's sad. And I hope it's changing a little bit each day. And that's part of the reason I do the work I do, is to try to change that paradigm. But currently that's the way it is if you have a doctor who believes in a plant-based diet. And I don't want any doctor out there to blindly believe in any diet, including carnivore or keto. I don't want you to blindly believe that. I want you to understand the physiology behind it. Then if you think you understand the physiology, then you can promote a specific diet and then we can have a conversation about that. But if you just believe it because somebody you look up to said it, you're not a very good doctor.
You took the words out of my mouth. I'm glad you went to the fasting insulin, because when we start talking hemoglobin A1C and bringing that down, it could just be the body compensating, making more insulin, regulating that blood sugar, and really masking what's happening behind the scenes. So if we don't get to the fasting insulin, we're not really getting to the root of what's happening.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's why the vegan cardiologists don't want to talk about a fasting insulin. They think it's a superfluous test that doesn't serve any purpose. But if you understand the human physiology of glucose, insulin, and glucagon, you immediately understand why the fasting insulin or a C-peptide, that's mandatory. If you're going to pretend to manage any patient's pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes or MODY or LADA, if you're going to pretend to be the doctor in that situation and manage that, you damn well better be checking a fasting insulin and or C-peptide, or you're just a bystander with an opinion. That's all you are, because you're not checking the bedrock physiology of what's going on in that patient's body.
The other test I'd be curious too, for somebody that feels like they're healthy and they're doing all the right things, is getting a CT or MRI and seeing what's going on with visceral fat. And I feel like this is becoming more and more of a conversation. I know you write about it in your latest book. Visceral fat, people can appear to be normal weight on the outside and have all kinds of trouble happening on the inside. So let's get into what that is and what causes that.
Yeah, visceral adiposity is a huge marker of metabolic disease. And so there are several ways that you can kind of detect it without spending the money for a full body MRI, which that's the gold standard, but that's super expensive. No insurance is going to pay for that, and many patients can't afford that. I recently had a discussion with Dr. Sean O'Mara, and he's a big proponent of that. And for patients who can afford it, absolutely get a whole body MRI. That's going to show deliberately how much fatty viscera you have. And so, in the same way that we fatten up cows so that the ribeye is marbled and beautiful and tastes delicious by feeding them grains and corn and other grass seeds, that works for humans as well. And so humans can suffer from fatty liver. They can also have fatty pancreas. And most doctors have never heard of that, and no patient has heard of that unless they watch my YouTube channel. You can have fatty heart, you can have fatty lung, you can have fatty tongue. Vast majority of people with sleep apnea have fatty tongue. If you do an MRI of their oral pharynx, you can see the marbling in their tongue muscle just like a ribeye. And you can also have fatty muscle in your legs or in your arms. And so when you're eating too many carbohydrates, your body's trying to put that somewhere. It turns it to fat and stores it. When you get fatty liver, that's the first step towards type 2 diabetes. When you get fatty pancreas, you're either severe pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. And so checking visceral fat is a huge thing. And most doctors have no idea how to do it. Now, the way the average person can get it checked relatively inexpensively is to get a DEXA scan, which is historically used to check bone density. And so a lot of women will have heard of a DEXA scan because that's how they get their bone density checked. But you can also flip a couple of little buttons on the DEXA scan and it'll check visceral fat. And so for about $100, you can get that done. And if your doctor refuses to order it, you can go to the average diagnostic imaging center and you don't even need a doctor's order. You can get it checked and they'll charge you 70, 80, 100, 150 bucks. And then now am I truly metabolically healthy? And this where it really, I think, does the most good is for people who are skinny, right? They're like, no, I eat pure junk all the time. And I look at me, I'm the picture of health until you check that DEXA scan or that CAT scan or that MRI. And then you see all this visceral fat and you see usually sarcopenia. They don't have nearly as much truncal muscle as they should have. And they've got way too much intra-organ fat in the liver and in the pancreas and other organs, but also fat surrounding those organs inside the visceral fat. And that they're in some cases, they're actually at higher risk of heart attack and stroke than somebody who's just fat on the outside.
You mentioned Dr. Sean. I recently chatted with him as well. And the way I understand it from him is that when you get this fat around your organs, that's going to make your inflammation in the body go up, which ties back to the heart disease that you were talking about earlier.
And
so we're putting the whole picture together.
And the glycocalyx. That's exactly right. It all ties together. Yes.
So you mentioned their DEXA scan. Is there any value in just taking a measurement around the waist?
Yeah, for people who just have no financial resources at all, you can buy a $2 Taylor's tape, and you can do what's called a waist to height ratio. And so you measure your height in inches or centimeters, and then you measure your waist at the biggest part, usually right around the belly button, the place where you don't want to measure your waist. That's where you measure it in inches or centimeters, and you keep the units the same, and then you divide the waist by the height. And if that number is greater than 0.55, you've got some degree of visceral adiposity. And the higher that number is, the worse your visceral adiposity is and the more danger that you're in. So waist to height ratio, that's a great way to just measure this at home. If you don't have the financial resources to get a DEXA scan or an MRI, you can do that. And if it's above 0.55, you need to work on lowering that. And the way you lower that, again, is to eat a very, very low carbohydrate diet. That's step one. And then step two is start to do some kind of high intensity exercise, either weight bearing or sprinting or swimming or cycling super fast to start to burn off that visceral fat. And once you've reversed that, and you've got clean coronary arteries, it's almost like a 10-year guarantee that you're not going to have a heart attack for the next 10 years.
Coming back to this continuum of the proper human diet, it sounds like the entry point is getting your carbs down to 100 grams a day, gross. And then on the other end of that diet is the carnivore diet. For somebody who hasn't been counting carbs and conscious of how many carbs they're eating on a regular basis, just to get a ballpark idea comparison, what would you say the average American is consuming in amount in grams of carbohydrates versus that 100 grams?
The average U.S. adult is consuming somewhere between 200 and 400 total grams of carbohydrates each and every day. And for many of them, a very high percentage of their carbohydrate intake is highly processed carbohydrates, which are basically made of three ingredients: sugar, some grain that's been ground up and highly processed, and vegetable oil. For many Americans especially, that is over 50% of their daily diet. Now, it may come in the form of a bagel for breakfast, right? A pizza crust, the pizza slice for lunch, and then some kind of bread, even if it's whole grain bread. But if you actually crunch the numbers, over half of their diet is coming from sugars, grains, and vegetable seed oils. And so that's why when I first started doing this social media thing, 5 years ago, my first 3 steps to adopting a proper human diet is get rid of all sugar from your diet. Definitely added sugar, but also eventually natural sugar as well. Number 2, get rid of all the grains, all of them. They are starvation foods. They're not optimization foods. And then step 3, get rid of all of the vegetable seed oils. And so there are 3 nut or fruit oils: avocado, olive, coconut, which don't seem to be as inflammatory. They don't seem to be as bad. But many people, I'm one of these people. All my fat comes from animal sources. I don't consume any plant fat whatsoever anymore. It's all butter, beef tallow, lard, sheep's tallow, chicken fat. That's 100% of my fat intake. And again, does that mimic the fat intake of our ancestors for the last 3.5 million years? Yeah, that's where they got 100% of their fat. And don't come at me with olives and avocados, because 15,000 years ago, those were pitty and tiny. They consumed them, sure, if they found them, but they were not what we consider a modern avocado, a modern olive. They didn't exist, and nobody was grinding up grains and trying to express oil from grass seeds or from seeds 15,000 years ago. And so you'd say, well, why this arbitrary 15,000 year cutoff? Well, that's well before the agricultural revolution. And so if you just say, okay, what's the percentage of time for humans on this planet, our ancestors, from 15,000 years ago back to 3.5 million years ago? That's 99.99% of our time on this planet. So for 99.9% of our time on this planet, we never ate sugar, ever, unless we found some ripe berries. We never ate grains, ever, unless we were literally starving. And we didn't even have access to vegetable seed oils, because you have to have a factory to process those. We never ate those. And so, again, people might call that an appeal to nature. But what I call it is being honest and true to our DNA. That's what we are as a species.
Earlier, you mentioned you're one of those people that easily puts on weight. And it sounds like you're carnivore, or you're at least highly swayed toward that end of the spectrum. Are you at this point 100% carnivore?
I'm very close to 100% carnivore. Maybe once a week, I'll have some veg. Once a year, we've got blueberry bushes on the farm here. We've got an apple tree, we've got a pear tree, plum tree that Nisha's grandfather planted years ago. And when those are ripe, me and Beckett, we'll go out. He's my 3-year-old. We'll go out and we'll eat those every morning until they're gone. And that's usually a week or two, right? And so for 50 or 51 weeks out of the year, I don't eat any veg whatsoever. Maybe once a week I'll have, a Brussels sprout off somebody else's plate, but 99% of what I ingest is animal foods. And that includes all the fat, that includes all the protein. And then there are a few carbohydrates in plant foods, but it's very, very tiny compared to any plant food.
And as somebody who is on a really strict diet, carnivore-ish, how do you feel when you start including the fruit for that narrow period of time during the year? Do you feel like a big difference? I'm assuming you'd feel a big difference mentally, physically.
I feel the difference in my waistline. And so when the fruit is ripe, I'll put on 2 or 3 pounds in that 2 weeks, just from eating the fructose and the excess sugar, because the pears are delicious. The blueberries are delicious. So we also have blackberries as well. But that stuff's delicious. And I think that's exactly why human beings enjoy that stuff so much, is because we used to use that as a tool. When the fruit is ripe, that basically means winter's coming. And many people think, oh, yeah, but not in the tropics, not around the equator. Yeah, if you talk to somebody who actually lives in these places, that fruit is seasonal as well. And so we ate the fruit when it was ripe to store body fat for the winter. And we don't hibernate like some mammals, but we do go through a period of food scarcity every year in the winter in all the temperate zones. And that's a large percentage of where we live on the planet, is the temperate zones. And so we learned how to use that fructose and that sugar to put on some weight, so that if the winter was really sparse, we wouldn't starve to death. Now, other people, when they eat plants, they start to have their skin condition flares up, or their joint condition flares up, or their gut condition flares up, or they notice a deterioration in their mental health. I don't have those. I'm just the fat white guy. I'm the guy that if I eat too many carbs, I'm going to get fat. And it'll no longer be this button in danger of popping. It'll be the one down over my belly button, which that's how it was back when I weighed 297 pounds. And my wife bought me this shirt. I apologize for this. She likes them to be tight. I don't, not so much, but yeah. And so I think it's super important to try these trials I don't want you to blindly believe me ever. If you do a 90-day carnivore diet, beef, butter, bacon, eggs, or include seafood, include whatever, after those 90 days, I want you to experiment with carbs, because this is the one science experiment that you have control over. And it's also the one that you're going to either profit from or suffer from if you get it wrong. And so I think it's never a sin to say, okay, I've heard of this guy. He says that his carnivore diet, he eats lots of fruit and honey. Well, after you've been strict carnivore for 90 days, I want you to try that, because it may be that as long as you keep your total carbs under 100 a day, you can eat fruit and honey every day, maybe, but you need to try it and see. And so many people, when they try that, they're like, oh, yeah, I can do this. It works good for me. Other people are like, oh, hell no. I started to gain weight immediately when I started to eat that fruit every day. I don't want to be fat anymore. I've already been fat for 30 years, Jesse. I don't want to be fat no more. And so I'm just going to stick to strict carnivore. But those kind of experiments, I think, are very valuable for people to do. And it kind of mimics how we lived in the past. Once again.
If somebody wants to experiment and go all the way to the end of the spectrum and do strict carnivore for a period of time at least, what does that look like? I know salt is obviously part of that, salting our food like we talked about before to taste. Meats, you mentioned butter, and you mentioned all the different types of animal fat that you consume. Let's talk about what falls under that strict carnivore umbrella.
Yeah, so strict carnivore is anything that comes from an animal. And so depending on where you are in the world, that could be lizard. Also, let me add, I think that insects are carnivore. Humans have eaten insects for millions of years. I don't advocate that. I don't think that you should be forced to eat the bugs. But we've always eaten insects. And whether you want to eat them or not, I think is your decision and your choice. But that is a carnivore option. I like to talk about beef, butter, bacon, and eggs, because it's very easy to remember. It's very affordable if you calculate how much it's costing you per pound of food. It's hard to forget. Then that also obviates all the questions of, well, is this carnivore? If it ain't beef, butter, bacon, and eggs, don't eat it, right? And then some people do BBB and E and S, which is seafood. So sardines and mackerel and anchovies, the smaller cold water fish that don't eat enough other fish to accumulate the mercury. I think that's also very viable for people to do, and also very affordable. And so basically, if it comes out of an animal's cloaca, or it comes off an animal's body, or it comes out of an animal's teat, then I think it is carnivore. Now, we have to talk about milk, because a lot of people will say, well, milk is carnivore. Yes, it is. But we have to go back and say, why do mammals give their babies milk? It's so they can grow and gain weight as quickly as possible. That's what milk is for, and it's perfectly designed to help you grow and gain weight. And so if you're finished growing, all milk's going to help you do is grow, right? Grow the direction you don't want to. And so this applies even to raw milk. I'm a big fan of raw milk. If you're going to drink milk, try to find a reliable source of raw milk. I think it is much less bad for adults to drink. Now, if you're a human being from 0 days of age up to 5 or 6 or 7 years of age, I think you'll benefit greatly from drinking goat's milk, maybe even cow's milk, but definitely goat's milk and sheep's milk. Camel milk is also a great source depending on where you live in the world. You're going to benefit from that because you're still growing. But the vast majority of humans, over 3/4 of human beings alive on the planet right now, do not have lactase persistence. At about 5, 6, 7 years of age, they lose their ability to break down lactose. I'm not talking about, a few people in some weird country. I'm talking about 75% of the adult population on the planet is lactose intolerant. And we talk about that like it's a disease. We'll have lactose intolerance. That's the normal state. At 3 different times in evolution have human beings adapted to probably what was a starvation situation. And they adapted and developed lactase persistence, that's the enzyme that breaks down lactose. That's happened 3 different times, twice in Africa and once in the Nordic Scandinavian area. So we know we have an ability to do that, but the vast majority of us do not have lactase persistence. And so milk as an adult, even raw milk, It's full of lactase, and that's going to lead to inflammation. That's going to lead to weight gain. And so if you're under the age of 5, 6, or 7, yes, drink your milk. Absolutely. But if you're above that age, unless you're wanting to grow and gain weight as quickly as possible and more than likely develop some degree of inflammation, I would highly encourage you to avoid milk. There's a new study just out in the nutrition literature that people with eosinophilic esophagitis, it gets drastically better when they just stop all dairy. And so the reason beef, butter, bacon, and eggs contains butter is because that's just the fat component of the dairy, right? You take away the lactose and the other sugars, and you take away the proteins of the milk. You're left with just the fat component of the milk. And for some people, they're so sensitive to the dairy proteins that they have to actually clarify the butter and just only use ghee, right? But the vast majority of people can eat butter, and if there's not enough of the dairy protein, the caseins in the whey, to cause inflammation. And so beef, butter, bacon, and eggs is a great place for people to start because they can remember that the food's relatively cheap. And one of the beautiful things about a carnivore diet is you get to eat until you're comfortably stuffed. You don't have to portion control. You don't have to you don't have to calorie restrict. You get to eat until you're comfortably stuffed. Again, mimicking how our ancestors lived forever and how every other wild mammal on the planet lives. They eat until they're full, then they stop eating. And for some people, when I say that, that sounds almost like a revolutionary statement, Jesse. But don't we all breathe when we need to breathe? And if we don't need to breathe, we don't breathe as much? Yeah. Our heart beats as much as we need it to be. And if it's beating too fast, it slows down. If it's not beating fast enough, it speeds up. We don't have to think about that consciously. And it's my opinion that if you're eating on the proper human diet spectrum for you, you don't have to portion control. You don't have to count calories and restrict. You don't have to semi-starve yourself to maintain good health. Just like every other mammalian creature on the planet, if you're eating a species-specific diet, you get to eat until you're full. And then you don't eat again until you're hungry. And so also, this cuts out all the mindless snacking, the social eating. If you're not hungry, you don't eat. That's physiologically true to what we are. And so I think that is freeing for so many people because they've literally been portion controlling and calorie restricting for decades, only to meet with failure, right? But they're still doing that. And so when they come to real whole food keto or ketovore or carnivore, they still want to, they feel like that's required. Oh, I can only eat just this much and so many ounces. No. You get to trust your hunger again. And for some people, that's terrifying, Jesse. For the first few weeks, they're like, no, you don't know me. You think I can't binge on beef, butter, bacon, and eggs? Watch me. And I've actually had YouTube channels take me up on that because I offer one YouTube channel $1,000. It's a husband and wife team, the Two Crazy Ketos. I said, I'll give you $1,000 if you eat nothing but beef, butter, bacon, and eggs, and you can gain weight. And they're like, challenge accepted. And I didn't make a bet with them because I didn't want their $1,000. I just offered that reward. And after a month of gorging on beef, butter, bacon, and eggs, they both lost more weight even than they had lost on keto. And so I think the reason that kind of thing works is because we're going back to honoring the physiology of what this organism is. Inherently, if you're eating enough protein and enough fat, you're going to put your satiety hormones in a position where only if you're at the county carnival's hot dog eating contest trying to win $100 are you going to be able to overeat meat, fat, and protein. It's very, very hard to do. And you might do it for a week or two, but you're just going to naturally stop that inappropriate behavior when your choices are beef, butter, bacon, and eggs. You can eat as much as you want, but that's your 4 choices. And for many people, that simplifies it to the point, and it also frees them. Like, oh, I'm not going to gain 50 pounds if I eat as much as I want in a month or 90 days because Dr. Berry promised me that wouldn't happen. And for the vast majority of people at the end of that 90-day experiment, they're very thankful and very grateful to now know that about their physiology. You can trust your body if you're feeding it the right food. You can trust it not to betray you and not to go up 4 pant sizes in 90 days if you're not starving yourself. And I think that's very powerful. And for many people, That's when they realized, oh, this is not a diet. This is literally, I get to eat this way for the rest of my life. I get to eat until I'm comfortably stuffed, because I haven't done that since, in many cases, since I was a teenager. I had to starve myself or I would get as big as a house. I don't have to do that anymore. How freeing is that for millions of people around the world?
So you have the simplifying aspect of eating till you're full. I'd also assume it would be a lot simpler when it comes to, well, it is inevitably when you go grocery shopping, when it comes to what am I going to have for dinner tonight? I would assume, you're going to have less recipes. You probably find your handful of recipes that you're going to use on a regular basis because you have less ingredients. So I can see how life in a general sense, you'd save a lot of mental bandwidth and it would just simplify things in a big way.
Absolutely. And it winds up for many people being cheaper, especially people who are taking a handful of supplements every day and who are trying to buy all this protein bar and this protein shake and this and that. Because like I said earlier, when you do the math on those, they wind up to be $20 or $30 or $40 a pound. And would you rather spend $30 or $40 a pound for protein bars and protein shakes, or would you rather just get your protein from $4 a pound eggs and even $10 a pound beef? It becomes very self-explanatory. And I think you're exactly right. You save all that mental bandwidth, because another thing that ceases to have meaning is all the advertisements. The advertisements typically just literally become background noise. You could care less what Kellogg's has come out with the new whatever. You could care less because you now realize that's not food. That's a product they're trying to sell me. They just want my $5. When the new protein bar, the new liver cleanse, or the new whatever, fill in the blank, because everybody's trying to make a buck. This is human nature. That doesn't mean we're evil. We're just all trying to get by and make a living. But you realize as an individual, I don't need any of that shit. Literally, none of it. I don't need any of that. And for some people, that saves them hundreds of dollars a month. When they realize with just a few simple supplements, only needed because of our mismanagement of herds and of soil for the last 200 years. If it weren't for that mismanagement, we wouldn't even need the supplements. But currently we do. But there's only a very short list of inexpensive supplements that you need if you're eating a proper human diet. That includes lots of fatty meat and hopefully some sort of liver once or twice a week. You don't need any of those supplements. You don't need any of those protein bars, collagen, branched chain amino acid, creatine. I mean, literally, I could go on for 5 minutes listing all the crap that is now a waste of money for you. And for many people to find that I'm saving tons of mental bandwidth. I don't have to think about this shit anymore. I just do it. And I'm actually saving money on my monthly grocery and supplement bill. I don't have to buy all that stuff anymore. I literally go to 1 or 2 sections in the grocery. I'm done. I'm in and out of the grocery store in literally 10 minutes, if checkout's fast enough. I'm back home. I've got my food for the week. I don't have any temptations in the fridge, the freezer, or the pantry. I can meal prep if I want to. I'm not a meal prepper, Jesse. I don't know about you, but my meal prep is go look in the fridge, grab some meat, put it in the skillet for 3 minutes on each side, eat the meat. That's my meal prep. And that's how I live every day. Or I'll go get a dozen eggs, crack them open, and lightly cook them just till the white's done and eat that the whole dozen. That's my meal prep. And I don't like to meal prep, but if somebody wants to meal prep, you can go crazy prepping your meat and getting it ready in individual servings if that's your style, but that's not my style.
Let's make sure we clarify what that short list of supplements that you're into are. I know you mentioned salt before, and that could be looked at as sort of a supplement to what you're consuming on a regular basis.
Right.
And electrolytes. But what other ones do we have in there?
So salt should not be a supplement. It should be in our food, but it's currently not because we think eating blood and stuff like that is gross. So we have to treat it as a supplement. The electrolytes and the minerals we have to treat as a supplement because the soil has been so mismanaged for the last 2 centuries that in either the minerals are not in the soil or they are in the soil, but the soil has been so improperly managed that the minerals are locked up deep in the soil and we can't get access to them. So if the plant that grew in the soil, if it doesn't contain the mineral, then I don't care what the USDA Food Data Central website says. That mineral is not in that broccoli. That mineral is not in that strawberry. if it's not in the soil. It has to be in the soil, and it has to be available. Same goes for meat. If the soil that the pig, the chicken, the cow grazed on, if that soil doesn't contain that mineral, then it's not in the beef, it's not in the chicken, it's not in the egg, regardless of what the USDA says. It's in an egg. It can't be in there. It's impossible, right? And so salt, electrolytes, minerals, and then for many people who live in the interior of large continents, there's not enough iodine in the soil. And many people are deficient in iodine and they have no idea. They have symptoms of low thyroid, fatigue, can't lose weight, etc. And they're really quite iodine deficient. Checking your serum iodine level will not reveal this because your body uses iodine for so many things that it keeps your serum level very tightly controlled. People think, oh, it's just about your thyroid gland, iodine. The people who are a little smarter think, oh, no, it's about your thyroid and your mammary glands. People who are a little smarter say, oh, no, it's also your salivary glands. And then people who have watched my YouTube video about just how important iodine is know that every cell in your body, without exception, that's ever been studied, has a sodium iodide symporter on the cell membrane. What that means is that your cell is expending energy to pull iodine inside the cell. That's not trivial. Cells don't waste energy to pull whatever inside the cell unless it needs that thing. And then vitamin D, for many of us that live at far northern or far southern latitudes, we just don't get enough vitamin D because the sun should be the place where you get the majority. You can also get vitamin D from your diet. I've got a YouTube video, the 7 top vitamin D rich foods, and you can get it from there, but for many of us, we can't get enough. And so for some of us, at least during parts of the year, we need to supplement with vitamin D, and that's literally it. If you're including egg yolks in your diet, you're going to get plenty of folate. There are some strict carnivores who only eat ruminant meats called a lion diet, and a few of those guys have developed a folate deficiency. Not it wasn't dangerous. Their level dipped below normal. But if you include egg yolks in your proper human diet, you're going to get plenty of folate, plenty of choline. And so that you understand what a short list of supplements that is. And 3 of the things, the salt, the electrolytes, and the minerals, you'll only have to take those until such time as you spurred the local rancher and local farmer economy until you're surrounded by local ranchers and local gardeners again. Then you won't need these at all, which is great. I'd be very happy to never, ever have another bottle sold because I'm not here trying to sell supplements. I'm here trying to help people improve their health.
Ken, I want to start off talking about this new study. And this is all about the connection between, supposedly, I should say, red meat and type 2 diabetes. You did a video on this, and I'd just love to hear your thoughts and discuss.
Yeah. So first of all, we need to establish kind of some ground rules. If someone from the Harvard School of Public Health said, hey, Jesse, don't drink water anymore like you just did. I know, we've been drinking water for millions of years, but there's this new study out now, this observational study, and we looked at 216,000 people, and we found that drinking water causes type 2 diabetes. Okay. Now you'd be like, what? So literally the thing we've been drinking since we've been in existence on this planet now causes type 2 diabetes. What's the mechanism? How is that even possible? And then when you dig into the study, you find out that people who drink the most water have a 1.4 hazard ratio of developing type 2 diabetes versus the people who drink Coke instead of water. And you're like, well, that's a tiny hazard ratio. I mean, so that's literally what this study from the Harvard School of Public Health, one of the senior authors is Professor Walter Willett. They have come out and said that red meat increases your risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And so just with the same as with the water analogy, or if they came out with a study saying, hey, breathing real air increases your risk of type 2 diabetes, you need to start breathing New York City air, and that'll be somewhat protective. You'd be like, what? Well, that literally human beings have been eating red meat for almost as long as we've been breathing air and drinking water. As a specific species, Homo sapiens sapien, we've been eating meat as much as we could get for exactly as long as we've been drinking water and breathing clean air. And so, on its face, right off the bat, this is an exceptional claim. You see what I'm saying? This is not just some maybe. This is an exceptional, extraordinary claim. And one of my heroes and probably yours, Sagan, said, if you make an extraordinary claim, then you need to have extraordinary evidence to back that claim up, or otherwise I'm going to ignore you. And so, in order to say that red meat ingestion increases your risk of developing type 2 diabetes, you're going to need a randomized controlled trial that goes on for 5 or 10 years in human beings with a large number of participants in the study. Then I might take your claim seriously. I would still need more research, but I would at least take it seriously and go, crap, maybe I've missed something here. But you're going to come at me with a prospective cohort study, which is an epidemiological study, which by its very definition doesn't prove anything. That's where we're at with this, Jesse. That's what's going on here. They're literally saying drinking clean water and breathing clean air and eating red meat will increase your risk of diabetes. And here's the weakest of all scientific research, an observational study that barely shows a possible association. And so, just to give people some context, back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when scientists were really looking into tobacco smoking and its link to lung cancer, when they would do an observational study and follow people, they would wind up with a hazard ratio of 15, of 20, of 25, of 30. Huge hazard ratio. And they use that evidence to say, dude, it's highly likely that smoking cigarettes increases your risk of lung cancer. And so now when we look at this study, it has a hazard ratio of not 24, not 14, but 1.4. And for your listeners who don't read a lot of epidemiological research, a hazard ratio of 1 means it has literally no effect whatsoever. It's a non-issue. And so this is 1.4. But if you look at CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, they'll have headlines like eating red meat linked to developing type 2 diabetes. Well, that implies a causation, doesn't it? Just the language they use. Or the more red meat you eat, the higher your risk. Again, implying causation, like, oh, this study definitively proved that. And I think part of that is just laziness on the part of the science reporters at these, if they even still have a science reporter anymore. I'm not sure. They've probably been laid off. But so they take the results of this study, and then also Harvard released a press release about this study and implied that this is a very strong association, 1.4 hazard ratio. They literally said very strong association. This is foolishness. So anybody with a bachelor's degree in any kind of scientific field who's taken a statistics class know immediately that a hazard ratio of 1.4, that's about as weak as it gets. That's not in any way a strong association. That is in no way implies causation. And so the very, very intelligent scientists, some within the health and nutrition sphere, have already published posts or they've tweeted about this study like, aha, I knew it. This red meat, man, here it is. Here's another study. And so my friend Sean Baker, he makes a great analogy. If you've got a shovel full of bovine excrement, and then you put another shovel of bovine excrement and another shovel, and you just keep shoveling, then you'll finally have a huge pile of bullshit. But that doesn't mean that the bullshit proves anything. You can have 500 studies like this, and it doesn't prove anything. And it still just shows a possible weak association. And so this has been so heavily covered by the mainstream media that the average person is probably scared to death right now to eat red meat. And it's very unfortunate because red meat is an ancestral food for Homo sapiens sapien. It's something we've been eating our entire existence as a species on this planet. It's nutrient dense. It's very uninflammatory. When you eat fatty red meat, when you eat that instead of eating a high carbohydrate, highly inflammatory choice, your health actually improves. And two other things about this study that are just complete foolishness is, number one, they don't talk about a possible mechanism, how it could be doing that, which any study like this is going to say, it's our opinion that this is the biological or physiological mechanism by which this is occurring. And they don't really address that at all. I find that incredibly telling. And then secondly, as you know, Jesse, there's a huge population, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of people who have been eating only red meat in the carnivore community, that some have been doing this for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so if they wanted to do some kind of, not even a control, but just a comparison study of, let's see, the people who are eating a vegan diet, that's the most extreme of anti-red meat, versus people who eat several servings of red meat every single day, several pounds in many cases of red meat every single day. Let's see what the incidence of prediabetes, of type 2 diabetes, of hyperinsulinemia is in these two self-selected groups, yes, but in many cases, the carnivores are carnivores because they had type 2 diabetes. And so they figured out that if they eat only meat, not only will their type 2 diabetes get better, but it'll go completely away, and it'll stay away as long as they continue to eat nothing but meat. And so I find this study ludicrous on so many points that I'm a common sense country guy. Even though I'm a family doctor, things have to make sense. And at this point, I mean, we're talking about PhD researchers with decades of experience at the Harvard School of Public Health. They have to know this is a very, very weak, very poorly done study that doesn't prove a thing. And instead of reaching out to the mainstream news organizations and saying, hey, CNN, our study didn't prove that red meat caused diabetes. We didn't say that. You need to change you need to retract that, or you need to change your title or edit the article because we didn't say that. They haven't done any of that. They're just letting this build out in society. And so at some point you've got to go, what's really going on here, Jesse? Why are they putting this out as state of the art causation level research and then letting everyone believe that? At some point you've got to go, there's must be some other motive here besides helping people not develop type 2 diabetes.
If you're enjoying the episode, take a second and let me know by clicking like and subscribe below. Thank you so much. And now back to the episode. You said something there where people with type 2 diabetes are using an all-meat diet to actually reverse the condition. I want to get to that in a second, but let's set the scene of somebody that develops type 2 diabetes. What is actually happening in the body over years to get to that point, and then we'll talk about reversal.
Yeah, so the most likely thing, and I don't think anybody knows for sure, but the most likely theory is that if you continuously, meal after meal, day after day, eat a high carbohydrate diet, all carbohydrates turn into sugar. All carbohydrates are made of sugar. And the only carbohydrates that don't break down into sugar in your body is insoluble fibers. The starches, all of them break down into literal sugar. In many cases, they start to do this in your mouth before you even swallow them because you have an enzyme called amylase that is in your saliva. And so if they're like, no, whole wheat bread doesn't have any sugar in it, you can just take a bite of whole wheat bread. I mean, the organic, non-GMO, ancient wheat bread. I'm not talking about white bread, right, from Save-A-Lot. And chew it 50 times and then take a glucose detector strip. You can buy these at the pharmacy and just touch it to your tongue and watch it turn. You've already started to break down the starch in the bread to sugar. When you eat a diet like that every single day, and many people following a plant-based diet are drinking fruit juice smoothies and eating whole grain bread and lots of fruits and vegetables. That's the way it's always said, right? Well, they're keeping their blood sugar constantly high, which is in turn going to keep their insulin level constantly high. So the insulin's trying to push this glucose into muscle cells and other cells, try to get it out of the bloodstream because it's very damaging if it stays in your bloodstream. And the way we know this is because of type 1 diabetics. Before we had insulin decades ago, they would be dead by the age of 12, 15, maybe 20 if they were lucky, because of the severe damage that's done by chronically high blood sugars. And so your pancreas produces more and more insulin trying to push this glucose out of the bloodstream so it's not damaging the eyes, damaging the brain, damaging the heart, damaging the kidneys. But if your cells are already full of glucose, there's nowhere else to push it. And so your pancreas just keeps making more and more insulin in this blind attempt to get the glucose out of your bloodstream. Well, after years and years of that, your A1C starts to elevate. Because for the first few years, your pancreas can push enough of it out to keep your blood sugar close to normal. But after years and years of that, your pancreas just can't do it. And it's not that your pancreas burns out or stops making insulin. 95% of the time in type 2 diabetics, that's not true at all. If you check an insulin level, they're making not only a normal amount, but way more than they should be making because they're eating so many carbohydrates. This is a pretty well-established mechanism here. We've kind of known this since the 1930s, 1940s, that if you eat too much saccharine, that's the old word for it. Now we would just call it sugar in any form, any kind of carbohydrate, you're going to eventually develop type 2 diabetes. Now, some people do this much more quickly than others. Some people within 6 months of adopting a high carbohydrate diet, they're going to have prediabetes. Some people it takes 6 years. Some people it takes 20 years. But we all are moving towards that, moving in that direction if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet. And so if for your listeners who are not nutritionists or dietitians, meat is the lowest carbohydrate food on the planet that you can eat that's still nutrient dense. And so to imply that eating red meat increases your risk of type 2 diabetes, it flies in the face of every physiological mechanism we know about human glucose and insulin and glucagon metabolism.
Well, let's take the story even further and talk about the playbook for somebody that is in that position of having type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, which is along that continuum. So what you're saying here, and I want to further expand, is that meat doesn't raise insulin, doesn't spike blood glucose. So obviously a big part of this is to change the diet. We want to eliminate carbs or at least bring the carbs down. Naturally, we're going to increase the meat to fill in the gap when it comes to calories and substance.
You have to eat something.
Yeah. So let's talk about how far we need to take that. If we're eating like a regular type diet now and we want to start reversing this, at one end of the continuum is carnivore, no carbs. But typically, how far does somebody need to push it in the no carb realm or low carb to start to get the benefits and reverse things?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, let me correct one little thing that we missaid earlier. So eating meat does raise your insulin a modest amount, but it doesn't raise it nearly as high as eating a starchy carbohydrate. Fat, pure fat, barely increases your insulin level at all. So we have the three macronutrients, carbohydrates, fat, and protein. The carbohydrates spike your insulin because it turns into pure sugar and your insulin has to do something with that. Protein does raise your insulin a modest amount. Fat barely raises it at all. So with that being said, there is this concept in all of biology, but it applies to human biology as well. It's known as the normal distribution curve, right? And so most people are going to fall here. A few people will fall here and a few people will fall here. And that applies to everything you can talk about in animal biology and therefore human biology. So there are some people who are eating 200 or 300 grams of carbohydrates, total carbohydrates a day. But they're doing that because they're following the American Diabetes Association's handout. And they're making the recipes on the American Diabetes Association website. And they're not a dietitian. They're not counting carbs. They don't know. Now, type 1 diabetics have to count the carbs, and they have to also count the grams of protein because both of those will raise your insulin. And they have to adjust their insulin intake to accommodate that. So some people, what I would recommend for anybody who's currently a type 2 diabetic is to either download either Carb Manager or Chronometer. And I'm sure there's other macro trackers you can download and use for free on your phone. And the first thing I want you to do is track how many total carbohydrates you're eating a day and do that for a week or two. Now you've got your baseline because everybody's different. Some people are eating 150 grams a day. Some people are eating 350 grams a day. So the first thing you need to know as a type 2 diabetic is how many total carbs am I eating a day? Now you've got a number to work with. That's kind of your benchmark. So I'm currently eating 350 grams of total carbohydrates a day, and my A1C is currently 11, let's say, right? Which is terrible. Okay, now what you're going to do is you're going to cut that down, cut it back to 200 grams or 150 grams a day. That's still going to give you plenty of room for vegetables, even a slice of whole grain bread if you want that, for some fruits, for some nuts, and then also I hope you're including fatty red meat in that diet as well because you need the nutrition contained in meat. And so then you're going to recheck your hemoglobin A1C every 3 months. And so after 3 months of going from, say, 250 grams of carbs a day down to, then you're going to do 3 months of 150 total grams of carbs max. Then you're going to go back to your doctor and you're going to get your hemoglobin A1C. And I also want you to ask for a fasting insulin as well every time you ask for an A1C. Now, if you're currently injecting insulin, then you can't check a fasting insulin. That'll give you a false value. You're going to check a C peptide. Okay, that is a proxy marker for how much insulin your pancreas is secreting, and it's not affected by exogenous insulin that you might be injecting or inhaling. And so then let's say now your A1Cs come down to 8. Boom, that's a great improvement, but you're not where you want to be yet. So now you're going to go from 150 total a day down to 100 or 75 total grams of carbs a day. Do that for 90 days, then recheck the A1C and the fasting insulin. What is it now? Let's say, now it's down to 6.2. Huzzah. That's a great improvement. Now you're no longer type 2 diabetic. Now you only have prediabetes. Great victory. You're decreasing the amount of damage done to every small artery in your body by orders of magnitude. This is a huge improvement, but you're not there yet. So then let's say, okay, you're like, well, I want a normal A1C. By George, I deserve that. I agree. So now you're going to cut it down to 50 total grams of carbs a day. And then do it for 90 days. And then recheck those two tests. Let's say it's down to 5.7 now. Man, you're so close because 5.6 is normal. You still got the tiniest touch of prediabetes now. And so that's why most people wind up on a proper human diet spectrum, which is anywhere from 100 total grams of carbs a day. For some people, that'll reverse their type 2 diabetes. Some people have to go to 50 total grams. Some people have to go to 20, which is ketogenic. Some people have to go to 10, which is ketovore. Some people have to go to as close to 0 carbs a day as they can get to get their A1C back to normal, and that is a carnivore diet. So this spectrum, you're going to have some people that 100, that does it. Most people somewhere between 20 and 70, that's going to get them out of the type 2 diabetes danger zone. But some people on this end of the normal distribution curve are going to have to go 10 total grams or less a day in order to reverse their type 2 diabetes. And so that it's very simple. And that's the beauty of it, Jesse, is that you don't need a degree in nutrition. You don't need a degree in epidemiology. You just figure up your total carbs and then cut it in half. Wait 3 months, check the test. If that did it, huzzah. If that didn't do it, cut it in half again and keep doing that until you wind up with a normal A1C and probably just as importantly, also a normal fasting insulin. When you've got those two numbers normal, then you know you're eating a species specific, but also individual specific proper amount of total daily carbohydrate.
I'm glad you clarified at the beginning there that piece of meat still having a response with insulin.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as you say that, getting to think about the physiology and nuance there, Does that come from gluconeogenesis or glycogen that's within that muscle meat or a combination of the two? I'm just trying to understand what's going on there.
A combination of those two, but they're probably minor players. But so insulin is a hugely important hormone in the human body. It does push glucose out of the bloodstream into the cells, and many people think that's its primary job, but it also does hundreds of other things as well, one of which is protein metabolism, helping you break that protein down and get it where it needs to be. And so that's there's multiple reasons that eating just like a skinless, boneless chicken breast, that's going to raise your insulin a modest amount, not the spike you see with carbs, but the insulin has many, many jobs in the human body. And one of them is helping to put the protein where it goes when you've ingested it. And actually, people find when they're on a carnivore or a ketogenic diet that if they'll eat a fatty cut of red meat, like a type 1 diabetic, if they're doing keto or carnivore, they don't have to inject as much insulin as if they eat a low fat or a fat free cut of meat like fat free turkey deli meat or a boneless, skinless chicken breast. They actually have to inject a little more insulin with that load of protein than they would if the protein were paired with the fat that occurs with the protein naturally. So if you're eating a chicken breast, leave the skin on and leave the bone in, and you won't have to inject as much insulin that way because the fat helps to moderate that.
I'm glad when you got into the testing, you specified there the importance of testing for fasting insulin and hemoglobin A1C.
Yes.
The way I understand it, typically a conventional doctor wouldn't test the fasting insulin.
Right.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So there are still doctors out there, despite my years of YouTube harping, that won't check an A1C. Patients have to argue with their doctor. If they're say their fasting glucose is normal, their doctor won't say, well, why would you even want an A1C? Your glucose is normal. And the patient's reply is, yeah, but dude, I've been fasting for 12 hours. I could have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes and my fasting glucose still be normal. You know that, right, doctor? This is a literal conversation that some people have to have with a doctor who's behind on his or her reading. But then the average doctor, even today, after me being on YouTube for 5 years, yelling from the rooftops about check a fasting insulin, they're like, I'm not checking a fasting insulin. You're not a type 1. There's no reason for that. And so the patient has to explain to the doctor, as if the doctor is an elementary school student, why they need their fasting insulin checked, because it is indeed possible. Let's say, for instance, you're taking glyburide or glimepiride or glipizide for your type 2 diabetes or for prediabetes. So they work by actually forcing your pancreas to produce more insulin. That's how they work. Okay, it doesn't cure the diabetes or improve the diabetes in any way. It just makes you hyperinsulinemic. Well, if you just check a fasting blood sugar on somebody with prediabetes who's taking glyburide, their fasting blood sugar is going to be normal. If you check an A1C, it may just be normal or barely elevated. But if you check a fasting insulin on them, their fasting insulin may be 40 or 50, which reveals immediately that, number one, their pancreas is having to work triple time, quadruple time to keep that A1C as low as it is and to keep the fasting blood sugar as low as it is. Well, if a doctor has any common sense at all, they would say, well, why in the hell is their pancreas having to make so much insulin? Wonder what's making that necessary. And then for many doctors, the next logical step is, well, maybe if I tell them to cut back on the carbohydrates in their diet, their pancreas won't have to work triple time making extra insulin to push that glucose out of the bloodstream into muscle cells and other places. And so for many doctors, that's been their epiphany, is when a patient basically says, look, either check my fasting insulin or I'm going to find a new doctor. And then they do that because a fasting insulin can actually predict type 2 diabetes 10 years before the patient even develops it. And the average doctor doesn't know that. But when a doctor has got 3 or 4 patients who've seen my YouTube videos and they're like, no, you're going to check a fasting insulin. And then they do that. And then they see that they might start checking fasting insulins on other people as well. And when they see somebody with a fasting insulin of 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and that's very common for people eating a high carbohydrate diet, they can actually catch somebody who's on the direct route to developing type 2 diabetes and say, hey, lower get rid of all the starches and desserts and stuff and fruit juices. And boom, the fasting insulin comes back down, either normal or near normal. Well, you just added another 20 years to that person's life before they develop type 2 diabetes. And once doctors see the utility of a fasting insulin, they start checking in on everybody because it gives you a 10-year look into the future at what's going to happen to that patient's metabolic health. And most doctors are very happy once they get it. Once they understand what's going on, they're very happy to have that tool, and they start checking fasting insulins on everyone. But many doctors practicing right now today in 2023 are not going to check a fasting insulin unless you're prepared to stand up for your patient rights and your human rights and say, no, you either check it or I'm going to find another doctor.
Yeah, it's important we're getting into all this nuance because, like you're saying there, somebody's blood sugar can be awry for like 10 years and they're building up insulin resistance. The body's compensating by producing more insulin, keeping the blood sugar down, making it look like everything's good. But right away, if you trump all those other tests and go right to the fasting insulin, you can see what's happening years before. So just highlighting there and expanding upon that because of the importance.
Absolutely. And there's also checking a patient's triglycerides, which many doctors do, but they don't check it in concert with the fasting insulin. And so many patients have been told, many people in our private group, their doctor literally told them, look, your triglycerides are 400, 500, 600. You've got to cut back on the animal meat, the red meat, the saturated fat. And once the patient understands through our teachings what actually causes an elevation in triglycerides, they're like, how does a board certified medical doctor not know that saturated fat doesn't increase your triglycerides? That's not what does it. It's carbohydrates, and your body's attempting to turn that into triglycerides and then store that as fat in your body. That's where high triglycerides come from. But the average doctor, once they get through their third year of medical school, this is very important for everybody to understand. Up until the third year of medical school, anatomy and physiology, biochemistry, cell and molecular biology is pounded into their little medical school student brain. But starting the third year, when they start clinical rotations, the only thing they ever hear about after that till the end of their career in most cases is, what pharmaceutical are you going to prescribe for this? And what dosage? And which one should you not prescribe for this? And they just forget all the physiology because none of the people they look up to, their mentors, their professors, their chief residents, they don't talk about physiology anymore. They just talk about what's the latest and greatest diabetes medication you can prescribe for this patient. And you get points on the clinical rounds if you've prescribed the perfect diabetes medication or the newest diabetes medication. You get points for that. But seldom do you get anything but yelled at if you say, well, now I seem to remember back in my physiology textbook that saturated fat didn't really raise triglycerides. It was the glucose metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism, eating too many carbs. That's what raises triglycerides. You're not going to get a gold star for that in the hospital rounds.
So we've talked about when it comes to quality, we've gotten deep into the water perspective, talking about RO water and getting carbonated waters in glass. But how do you think about quality when it comes to food? There are a lot of different options now with non-GMO, organic, grass-fed meats. How much of a priority are those for you when it comes to feeding you and your family?
Not much of a priority. I think they do matter to some degree. And typically when you really tease down into the research, you find that so we'll use grass-finished meat, for example. It typically turns out to be somewhere between 1% and 5% higher in omega-3 fatty acids and maybe some vitamins and minerals. It's not a huge difference. And so if you can afford grass-fed, grass-finished, panda massaged meat, then I think you should buy that, because that's going to also stimulate the economy to produce more of that, because we all vote with our dollars every day, and many of us are voting with the wrong voting for the wrong things, aren't we? And so, yes, if you can afford organic, non-GMO, grass-finished everything, then definitely spend the money. But some of us just can't afford that, and that's why I have a YouTube video called "Cheap Carnivore." If literally all you can afford is bologna and hot dogs and Spam, you can improve your health with those. Now, you may not be able to completely optimize your health, but it's going to be a great improvement over eating the other highly processed carbohydrate inflammatory crap that you were eating before. And people need to understand that because, the economy is not great right now. And many of us think it may get worse. And so being able to afford food is a big deal. And we can get off into all kinds of socio-political whirlpools here if you want to. I'm happy to do that. But over the last 20 or 30 years, food has been cheaper in modern society than it's ever been in the history of humanity. Food procurement used to be life and death, right? And then it was like, it's 50% of your income to feed your family. And then it was for many, many centuries, it was 30% of your income roughly. That's what you spent on food every day, every week, every month. It was 30% of what you produced. You had to use that to either eat it or to procure your food. And for the last few decades, it's been 5 or 10% of your income for many people. And that's very spoiling. That'll spoil you. And so all of a sudden, when eggs and meat start to float back to what their proper price should be, for many people, that feels like price gouging. But they don't understand two things. First of all, you weigh real food by the pound, and you weigh highly processed food by the ounce or by the serving. That's the first thing. And so when you take this box of Cheerios that's 18 ounces, right? It's like, that's a lot of food. Look at that big box. Well, if you took this and crushed it down and got rid of all the puffed air, it's maybe a cup and a half of actual food and nutrient void food at the same time. Does that make sense? You don't weigh this by the pound. If they sold this by the pound, nobody would buy it because it's about $27 a pound.
That's so interesting.
Right. And so many things are like that. The protein bars, this market is huge right now. And people think, I need a protein bar, which is usually a carbohydrate bar if you look at the nutrition panel. But for some of these, like the Cliff Bar and like the Quest Bar, they're $25, $30 a pound. If you calculate the price that way instead of just calculating by the bar. But whereas eggs, if you calculate how much does a pound of eggs cost, it's like $3 or $4. Super cheap. If you look at beef, it's so much per pound, and it may be like shit. It's $16 a pound, but it's still way cheaper than a Cliff Bar is per pound. It's way cheaper. And so even though the prices of real food have been going up, they're still much cheaper if you calculate them by the pound, and then also calculate by nutrient density. This is so nutrient void they have to fortify it, which means adding factory-made vitamins and minerals back to it. Well, that should tell you something right off the bat. You've never seen a fortified egg. You've never seen a fortified pound of ground beef. You've never seen a fortified pack of bacon. You don't have to fortify those things because they're rich in vitamin minerals by definition. And so I think that people worry about the price of food, and you should, but at the same time, you have to understand the word food has a definition. Food means it's full of nutrition, and it doesn't cause inflammation, and it causes your muscles and bones to get stronger, and it causes you to have good mental health. That's the definition of food. Food should be, by definition, good for you. So then you're like, well, is this really food or not? I would opine that this is not food. Or you could say it's a starvation food. I think that's another great way to look at this. If you're starving to death, eat all the Cheerios, eat all the grains, eat all the sugar. They will keep you from starving to death. But if your goal is optimal health, if it's ultimate health, this is not the foods you want to be eating. You want to be eating nutrient dense, ancestrally appropriate, uninflammatory food that has all the vitamins and minerals in there. That's real food, and that's going to cost you a certain percentage of your daily or monthly income. Sorry, But yeah, food is going to, your percentage of your income that you spend on food is probably going to go up over the next few years. And then finally, one of the reasons I love a proper human diet so much, the concept and the principles, is because it spurs local farmers and local ranchers. Because I'm a country boy, I'm a redneck. And where I come from, there's always a risk that if you mislead someone, they will come and have a talk with you. Okay? That's a euphemism. That means they will come and they'll get you by your shirt collar and they'll say, hey, dude, you lied to me. And so this local farming and this local ranching, you actually know the guy that raised your beef or that raised your sheep. You actually know the name of the person, which I love that relationship. And I think I want to encourage that every time I can. But it also, the implicit assumption that is, if you mislead me, I know where you live. I'll come and find you. Anybody know who the board of directors is for General Mills or Kellogg's? You don't know them. You can't get your hands on them. If they screw you out of your health, what's your recourse? You can maybe find an attorney and sue them. They'll have 18 corporate lawyers show up and have the case dismissed. But if you bought your beef from a local rancher, you know that guy. You can either go to him in person and thank him or her, give them a hug, send them a Christmas card. Or if they mislead you and make you sick, you know they're right down the road. And so I love that the principles of a proper human diet are spurring local farmers and local ranchers. People are starting to look. I wonder if anybody raises pastured eggs around me. I wonder if there's a local pig farmer where I can say, hey, I just want my pig to eat grass and acorns and grub worms. I don't want you to give them any grain. You start to look for that stuff, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I'm happy to pay a little bit of a premium because it's real food. It's nutrient dense. It mimics the food that my ancestors have been eating for millions of years. So there's a lot tied up in this proper human diet movement that I think is very, very important, that not only is going to strengthen people's bodies and minds, but it's going to start to strengthen local economies and spur production of actual real food. And so, but currently we're if you live in an urban center, you're going to buy food from the grocery. You got no choice, right? You can't take a day off work and go out in the country and find a guy who's going to raise you a pig and some broccoli. You got to buy it. And so I think do the best you can. And that's another principle of a proper human diet is all you can do is all you can do, Jesse. Right? There are forever chemicals in our atmosphere, in our groundwater now. There's glyphosate. You want a good source of glyphosate? Here you go. But there's glyphosate in everything now. There's nothing you can do about that. But the one thing you don't want to do is give up, because I think there's a huge space for you to improve your metabolic health and your mental health by eating a proper human diet. Can you reach perfection? Probably not, because the corporations have poisoned the environment so much. But you can do drastically better than you're currently doing by choosing better options every time you put food in your face.
As you're talking there, it gets me thinking about the two different aspects that come with buying better food. Part of it is the fact that you're going to get possibly some more nutrition within that food. And of course, if you're having something that's not processed like beef versus Cheerios, you're getting a lot more nutrition. But I'm talking about comparing like conventional beef to grass-fed beef. The other aspect is what you're not getting. So you're not getting, certain, say the beef has been fed grain that's moldy if you're getting conventional beef, or there's glyphosate on that grain, and then that accumulates in the tissue that you're consuming. So you have to look at it from, what am I getting by spending more, and what am I not getting?
And that's a great point. And so let's talk about the cow example. Cows also, they have 3 filters that they run all their food through. First is the multi-chamber stomach, because they're ruminants, right? And this filters out tons of toxins. And that's why you can feed a cow an improper diet and they still don't die. And they wind up producing some of the best human food on the planet. But they also have a liver, which detoxifies the hell out of their diet. They also have kidneys, which helps the liver detoxify this stuff. And so when you've run this inflammatory, slow poison food like grains through cows, they've got 3 filters to filter out the inflammatory toxins and just the flat out toxins, the mold spores, all of this stuff. And so when you eat that pack of fatty meat, that cow's already done a lot of the filtering for you, right? Even the most poorly fed beef is still very, very healthy for the average human to consume. Very, very healthy. Much healthier than any processed food that you can buy in the unrefrigerated section. So basically anything in a plastic bag or a cardboard box, the cheapest beef you can buy at your supermarket is way better for you, not only with regards to the nutrition profile, which you touched on, but also that cow's already applied 3 filters to the food that it was fed so that it's left with much, much healthier protein and fat that then you can consume. Right. So I love to, and let me just be very clear. I'm 100% opposed to the deplorable confinement feeding operations and feeding cows improper food. 100% opposed to that. But our alternative is, Jesse, what are we going to do about that right now? What do we do about that today? Well, you start looking for a local rancher and a local farmer. You start buying local pastured eggs, because now you're voting with your dollars to support that instead of voting with your dollars to support the 4 big meat processors in the United States. It's only 4. People don't realize that. There's only, and they're probably there's going to be a consolidation. Then there'll be only 3. These guys care about profits and turning a profit for their shareholders and being in compliance with their board of directors. They don't give a damn about your health. The one thing they don't want to do is kill you quickly. Because if they kill you quickly, then that's a lawsuit that they'll probably lose. But if they cause inflammation and kill you slowly over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, they don't care about that because nobody's going to file a lawsuit about that. And so I am 100% for animals being treated properly, properly raised, properly fed. But if we just said, that's it, we actually have an example of this in a foreign country that a few years ago said, that's it, only organic vegetables. We're not using any pesticide anymore. And I won't name the name of the country, but that became law in this kind of dictatorial run country. Now they have mass starvation. They're literally dependent on handouts from other countries to keep their entire population from starving to death. And that's what would happen to any country that too quickly implemented this. And so I'm 100% opposed to that, but currently we're stuck with that because of the mistakes made by our elders and our predecessors. We're now stuck in that model until we can stimulate the growth of regenerative ranching and regenerative farming and get that scaled up to the point where we can all eat that. There's no way around this right now. And so for the poorest among us, you're going to be stuck with the cheap meat at the supermarket, which is not perfect, but it's way the hell better than what you were eating before. And then for people who are of means, they can buy pastured eggs and pastured pork and pastured grass-finished beef. Do that, because you're actually going to stimulate that economy, and eventually that'll lead to price decreases where other people can afford it as well.
Ken, as somebody in his mid-50s, you co-wrote a book, Kicking Ass After 50. I have a good portion of my audience as males that are in that age range. One of the things that tends to come up when people get to that range is low testosterone. And in that book, you wrote about this. So I want to address this issue for people that are in that boat. What might they be doing to start off that's depleting that?
Yeah, and so when you eat a diet that's full of carbohydrates and that's low in animal fat and animal proteins, and you're sedentary and therefore losing muscle mass, you're going to have low T. That's just going to happen. Okay. Now, in the past, we would say, oh, as you get older, your testosterone goes down. But I have trouble honoring that trope anymore, because I've seen multiple hundreds of men in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s. I've got guys in our private group, they have a T-shirt that says "Kicking Ass After 70" to honor the book, but they're like, I'm way past 50 and I'm still kicking ass. And so what we see is when you have a sedentary guy eating a high-carb diet, you check his testosterone, it's 250 or 200 or 150. And you put that guy on a fatty red meat diet. And then once he's eaten that diet long enough that he's actually lost some weight, lowered the inflammation, lowered the insulin, and now he's feeling better, to get up out of the recliner, to get up off the couch, and he starts to lift heavy things, right? Join the gym and work out, or just go out in the garage and lift 2 car batteries. I don't care. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to stress your muscles and stress your bones. Start sprinting in the backyard. You can wear your work boots for all I care. I don't care. I just want you doing hard things physically. When you start to do that, we've got guys in our private group who have increased their testosterone with no testosterone injections, no pellets, no creams, anywhere from 50 up to 400 points. Documented before and after total testosterones went up 400 points after 3 months of carnivore and lifting heavy things. Now, for the vast majority of guys, if you raise their testosterone 400 points, huzzah, they don't need any other help. But there are some guys that even after they've done it all, carnivore and lifting heavy things, it'll only go up 50 or 100 points, and then they're still hanging out at 250, 300, 350, and they're just still don't feel like it. And I'm 100% an advocate. After you've done the work, you've done carnivore and you lift heavy things for 90 days, if your T is still low, go find somebody that does bioidentical hormone optimization and get your testosterone optimized. There's not a shred of research that proves that optimizing your testosterone increases your risk of heart disease. There's not a shred of research that shows that it increases your risk of prostate cancer. All of that is bullshit that's based on the same epidemiological research that we started this conversation with. When you actually look at the hard data, there's either no proof either way with testosterone optimization that it causes or prevents, or there's actually research that shows that it prevents heart disease or prevents prostate cancer if the testosterone you're replacing with is bioidentical.
Do you recommend when men get to a certain age, they go and have testing done to objectively see where their testosterone level is, or should they just base it symptom-wise? And if the latter, what symptoms should they keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I used to recommend that, Jesse. Everybody after the age of 50, you need to have this checked. But now I'm coming to see that if you feel great, if you sleep great, if you're full of energy, full of motivation, if the most attractive thing in your house is not the recliner, right? If you've got somebody who you've got your sexual eye on and you're taking care of business in the bedroom, I don't give a damn what your total testosterone, your free testosterone, your sex hormone binding globulin. If all that stuff is working, if this is working, if both heads are working, I don't really think it's mandatory that you get those tests checked, because I've seen time and time again, I'll check a guy and his testosterone is 450, let's say, but he's rocking life, rocking mentally, physically, sexually, everything is on. And then we'll replace it and get him up to 800. He comes in 3 months later, he's like, I still feel great. I don't feel any more greater, right? It's the guys with symptoms. And I think this goes for women with menopause too. I think there are women who are going through menopause, documentable by checking their labs. They feel fine. They got no symptoms. They don't have any problem sleeping. Everything's fine. I don't think they necessarily need to optimize their hormones. I don't think that's been proven that they need that. And indeed, women, they would come anyway and say, well, I feel great, but my friend got these pellets and I want to get them too. And I'm like, well, I don't think it's going to hurt you. And we would do it. They'd be back 3 months later, like, I couldn't tell any difference at all. I still feel just as great as I did before. That's kind of de facto evidence that me raising that man's total testosterone from 450 to 850, I didn't really benefit him, did I? Did I hurt him? I don't think I hurt him. No, I don't think it damaged or harmed, but I also don't think it was worth the money and the time and the inconvenience. So if anybody out there, if you feel amazing, everything works right, your brain, everything, go live your life and have fun. Go outside and play. But if you're not feeling as good as you think you could, you better get the full lab panel that I talk about in the book Common Sense Labs, and you better start honoring the principles that we talk about in Kicking Ass Over 50. And you better start watching some of my YouTube videos, because your default setting is good health. That's your default. And if you're not enjoying good health, You're doing something that's tripping up your body, that's tripping up your metabolism, that's tripping up your physiology.
You mentioned sleep there. That's another one of the things you mentioned in the book. And obviously, that's tied to health as a whole, too. But if somebody is suffering right now with low T, that's something else they want to be tuned into and making sure they're getting restorative sleep. I think in the book, you say at least 7 hours a night.
Yeah. And so the research again, somewhere between 6 and 9 hours a night. And I think for that, like every other thing in human physiology, there's a normal distribution curve. Some people need 9 hours a night. Some people can get by beautifully on 6 hours a night with no seeming harm. But low T and poor sleep, they go hand in hand. And I think there's a causative element to both. I think if you got low T, you're not going to sleep as well. I think if you have poor sleep, your T is going to be lower. Which is the chicken and which is the egg? I don't care, and I don't know, and I also don't care. I just want you to have great sleep and have a high enough testosterone level that you feel great. And that's the victory. And so for some guys, cleaning up their sleep hygiene and making sure they're doing everything right, starting when the sun goes down, from between then and bedtime. Also, actually starting when the sun comes up, getting that morning sun on their face. That's actually when you start to have good sleep. Every morning, get out in the sunlight. I don't care if it's cloudy, snowing, raining, go outside. Because people don't realize this, but on the cloudiest day outside, it's 100 to 1,000 times brighter than inside your house with every single light in the house turned on bright. It's 100 to 1,000 times brighter outside on the cloudiest, snowy day. And our eyes adjust so quickly that most people, that when you say that, they're like, there's no way that's true. And they have to go look up the lux. They're like, oh shit, that is true. Yeah. And so that morning sunlight on your face every morning, that's one of the first steps to getting better sleep. And then when the sun goes down, your blue light needs to start going down. I'm not a fan of wearing the orange blue blockers all day long. I think that's stupid. Sorry. Yeah, I hope you don't do that, Jesse. But starting when the sun goes down, I do think you need to start thinking about the amount of blue light that's hitting your retina, because you have receptors in there that's looking not only at the color of the light, but also the intensity of the light. And so in our house, we've got a 15-month-old and a 4-year-old and a 54-year-old and a 30-something-year-old, right? When the sun goes down, we start dimming lights and we start switching to red light, not just for me, for my testosterone, not just for Nisha, for her estrogen, but for Beckett and Bonnie, for their developing bones and their developing brains. They need to mimic the pattern that our species has been mimicking for the last 300,000 years. Drink clean water, breathe clean air, eat red meat, and when it gets dark, it's dark. And when the sun comes up, you go out and play in it. That is a proper human life. And when you do those key things, everything gets better. And you start to realize health that you maybe thought was gone forever at any age.
All right, Ken, we're going to end on this, staying with testosterone here for another minute. For somebody that's tried the things that we've talked about, they're getting a good sleep, they're eating, low carb, red meat, and they're lifting heavy things, but they're not getting that level up. They're only seeing a little bit of an improvement before they go to replacement therapy, actually, the drug route. Are there natural supplements or anything else you can recommend before they go all the way there?
Yeah, there are several things that you'll hear promoted out there on the interwebs and websites and articles, but there's very little research to support any of the natural supplementation to improve testosterone. There's very little research support. And I talk about anthropology in the past so much, people think, well, he must not care about it. No, I definitely care very much about the latest research on all these subjects. The same for women in menopause, all of the evening primrose and all this and that. The research is equivocal. And I tell everybody, before you go the pharmaceutical route, absolutely try every single herb and supplement that you can try. Plus eating red meat and lifting heavy things, right? And getting good sleep. But then if the supplement route, if it doesn't play out for you, and I can't promise you, if you'll take this specific supplement, it's going to, no, because there's just no research to support that. All I can say is, well, if you want to put off the pharmaceutical route, try this first. Here's the following things to try. And I know a list of those just like you do, Jesse. And half the guys say, I couldn't tell that helped at all. 10% say, I think that maybe helped a little bit. Some will go check their labs. Yeah, it came up 50 points. Was that just lab error or did it actually help? I don't know. We don't have enough research to show one way or the other. So I don't talk about those things a lot, but I'm 100% advocate. Try every non-pharmaceutical method before you finally take the pharmaceutical leap. And yeah, I absolutely believe in that paradigm. You don't ever go to the doctor for pharmaceuticals until you've exhausted every other natural thing that you can try. Absolutely believe that.
Earlier, when you were talking about numbers for testosterone, you got into the fact that it's going to be different for different people, and it's not necessarily the number that matters. But for people who want to have that baseline, I know there's free testosterone, and then what are the two different ones? There's two different tests there for testosterone. What baseline number should people at least know to base where they're at off of?
Yeah. So the total testosterone is what every doctor who's practicing anywhere close to standard of care, that's what you use to diagnose low testosterone. And then also you recheck that to check ongoing testosterone replacement therapy. Insurance companies will actually yell at you if you're using free testosterone to manage somebody. I've actually gotten letters before because I always check a total testosterone, a free testosterone, and a sex hormone binding globulin. But there's no research to support checking free testosterones or sex hormone binding globulin, even though I think they're important. The insurance companies, if you're trying to file insurance for low testosterone, and there is an ICD-10 code for that diagnosis, and then you can get reimbursed if it's low enough, but they keep lowering the number, right, before they'll cover it. But it's total testosterone. That's for the vast majority of doctors who practice this. That's the number they're looking at. And so when I first started doing testosterone optimization back in 2003, if your total testosterone was under 350, then insurance would that was officially hypogonadism. They would cover the treatment. Now it's 249. They've dropped 100 points off. So unless your testosterone is 249 or lower, most of the big insurance companies will not reimburse. Medicare will not reimburse for you to treat that as a medical condition. And I predict they'll lower it even more because they don't want to treat that. And then also getting back to kind of what the unspoken thing that you and I have been talking about this whole time is why in the world would Harvard School of Public Health be recommending a diet that's going to make people metabolically sicker? Why would the insurance companies, why would Medicare be okay with men's testosterone continuously getting lower? I don't know why. But I mean, there are people out there who have theories about this, but at some point, a common sense, rational adult's going to go, what the heck is going on here? Right, Jesse?
At this point, do you still practice medicine or do you put all your energy into creating content online and helping people that way?
So I have a small family practice. I still see patients who basically have been my patients for decades. Some are housebound, they can't get out, and so I make home visits for them just so they don't have to go see a new doctor. But I'm not taking new patients currently. I'm devoting the rest of my energy to social media, to reaching out to people saying, hey, you don't have to be sick the rest of your life. You don't have to have this mental illness, this physical illness for the rest of your life. There's a way out of that. Let me show you the way. And so I feel like that multiplies my ability to help people. And this is all Nisha's fault. My wife, she's told me 5 years ago, you should start a YouTube channel. And initially when she said that, I'm like, that's dumb. I'm a doctor. I'm a board certified fellow in the American Academy of Family Physicians. Why would I start a YouTube channel? And then one day I came home and she said, how many people did you help today? I said, I don't know, 30, 40. She's like, that's great. I'm proud of you. What if you could have just have answered my question? I helped 3,000 or 4,000 people today. Would that be something you'd be interested in? And I'm like, well, yeah, but that'd be a busy day in the clinic. She's like, you could start a YouTube channel. And so after about the third suggestion, I'm like, no, she's absolutely right. Why would I basically keep this from 3,000 other people a day when I could just be sharing this with them. I'll make a YouTube video, put it out there. If it helps people, great. If it doesn't help people, it didn't cost me a penny. Why not do that? And so I started doing that. I would go upstairs at lunch at the clinic, make a video. When I got to the clinic early, I'd make a video. Before I saw patients, I'd make a video at the ER in between during downtime. And that's how the channel has grown. And now I do the social media thing full-time, part-time practice, also full-time job as a farmer and a rancher. So I still have 2 full-time jobs, but they're different jobs than they used to be. And I feel like that I'm helping many, many more people than I could have ever helped just in the clinic.
When you started to put your energy into the online world and you were still practicing at the time, how long did it take before things started ramping up and you could see there's really some momentum and people want to hear what I have to say here?
It probably took a year and a half. And the thing that really freaked me and my office staff out was I can remember after probably a year and a half of making YouTube videos, my nurse, who I'd worked with for over a decade, she came in and she's like, "What are you up to?" Because these are my people. These are country people. They're not into the social media. They may be on Facebook, but they're not gleaning information from social media. She's like, "What are you up to?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, the first patient is a lady from North Carolina who flew to Nashville, Tennessee and rented an Uber or rented a car and is driven to Camden to see you as a new patient. And then later in the morning, we have a lady who flew from California to Nashville, rented a car, and is driven to Camden, Tennessee to see you as a new patient. Then this afternoon, we have a gentleman who flew from Arizona to Nashville. And so she's a common sense country girl. And she's like, "You got to be up to something fishy. I don't know. Why are these people coming from other states in the union and literally renting a car to drive another 90 minutes to come see you in the clinic in Camden, Tennessee?" And I'm like, they must have seen my YouTube videos. I don't know. And sure enough, that every single one of them. And so so we had a clinic fire several years ago. Our clinic burned to the ground. But before that happened, over half of my patients every day coming to the clinic were people who had seen my YouTube videos or my Facebook videos or my Instagram page and they were so unhappy with their existing healthcare provider that they had went that far out of their way, which to me, it's the ultimate compliment. Like my heart, I feel so humble and so blessed and so proud of Nisha's idea that caused that to happen, that these people were so hungry for health, mental health, physical health. They were starving for it. And they were getting no answers that helped them in any way from their current healthcare provider, that they literally got on an airplane, then got in a rental car, then spent the night at the Best Western in Camden, Tennessee to see me in the clinic. That told me everything I needed to know, that people are very disgruntled. They're very unhappy. They're frustrated. They're sick and tired of it. They want answers, but they also want answers that work. They don't care if these answers have been vetted by the World Health Organization. They could care less if the American Diabetes Association agrees with this or not. What they care is they want to get healthier metabolically. They want to get stronger physically. They want to get healthier mentally. And when they hear a message like mine on YouTube and they're like, "Okay, this is some crazy redneck from Tennessee. I don't know though. Let me try it. I've tried everything else." After they've tried that for 30, 60, 90 days and it actually worked, and they also weren't starving to death, and they also felt better mentally, not just, "Oh, I've lost 5 pounds, but I'm starving to death and I'm miserable." No, it's all better. Physically, I'm healthier. Mentally, I'm healthier. And I lost some weight. And I had to cut down on my blood pressure medicine because my blood pressure was getting too low. When all that stuff happens, a common sense person, an average person, just a bus driver, a hairstylist, a whoever, when that kind of thing happens, when that's never happened on any dietary pattern they've ever tried for their entire adult life, that's very, very powerful. And it's hard for them to forget that. It's hard for them to unhear that. Once they've heard the results that a proper human diet gives them, that's it. They're like, "Oh, okay, so this is a proper human diet. I don't need to veer from this. I need to eat this from now on if I want to be healthy physically and mentally."
And I feel like 2 of the factors at least that have contributed to your growth are, one, you're a medical doctor, so you've got the education behind you and the credibility, And two, you're somebody that's in the trenches with the people that are watching your videos as somebody that's had their own struggles with their health, and they can see the difference between, 297 pounds now down to 230. You've put this information to the test in your own body and showed that it works.
Yep. And that's another law of human nature, Jesse, is that when people see somebody that they know personally, when they see that person transform their health, or they see that person get rich, or they see that person, whatever, they immediately are drawn and attracted to, I want to know details. I want to know what you did because I know you. Remember earlier in this conversation, we were talking about the local regenerative ranchers and farmers. I know that guy. I can go talk to him. So when first of all, when my patients saw previously morbidly obese Dr. Berry, all of a sudden he's losing a ton of weight. And not only that, he's in a better mood. And not only that, his rosacea is better. And he's not clearing his throat constantly because of his severe reflux. And he's not limping because of that knee arthritis. They see that and they know me. And they've known me for over a decade. That's powerful. That is a powerful, powerful, hardwired thing in human psychology. When you see somebody you know improve something, you want to do that too. And so that's why I think the biggest thing has been eye to eye, word of mouth. You see somebody you know and love, Uncle Jesse, Aunt Karen. You see them, you haven't seen them in a year, and they're like, "Holy crap, they look amazing! What did you do, Uncle Emmer?" And they tell you, you're like, "Oh." And then you do the requisite internet search, and you find me, or you find one of the other people in the space talking about a proper human diet, and it's so simple. It's inexpensive. You don't have to sign up for a program or buy $100 a month in supplements. You just eat real food and you get healthier. And so I think all that together, plus me being a doctor doesn't hurt. I totally agree. Plus me previously being morbidly obese and miserable and now not being that, I think that helps. All that together kind of gives people this package that just makes common sense. And once you understand all the principles of a proper human diet, it becomes common sense. Like, duh, why haven't I done this all my life? Why haven't I heard about this 20, 30, 40 years ago? Why didn't my grandmother and mother teach me to eat this way? And it's because as a society, we've all been deluded and misled by billion-dollar companies and by governmental organizations that have basically been captured by those billion-dollar corporations who are trying to make a profit. They're not interested in your health.
Let's address some of the worst offending foods for people that say are adopting a proper human diet, but still have some carbohydrates. Say they're around that 100 grams of carbs. And the first one I want to address is seed oils. And I think this can be one that really trips people up. They can hide in different foods. Talk about those. And again, somebody in your case where you're eating a carnivore diet, I can't see how those would get into your diet, but for somebody that's going to have some carbs.
Right. And so we see amazing transformations in people who get all of the vegetable seed oils out of their diet. Now, I'm an honest guy. I'll shoot you straight. The research supporting removing seed oils from your diet is not nearly as robust as the research saying you should eat a low-carb diet. That research, in my opinion, is very clear and very solid. But the vegetable seed oil research, I don't think is as clear. But that's always been one of my first three steps. Step one, get rid of all sugar out of your diet. Step two, get rid of all grains out of your diet because they turn into sugar. And step three, get rid of all the vegetable seed oils. That's been my mantra since 2017. That's the first three steps of adopting a proper human diet. And so for many people, and remember the normal distribution curve, I think there's a subset of people that vegetable seed oils are very inflammatory, just the least amount. Some people, if they eat too much, it's going to be inflammatory. Some people seemingly can eat a lot of vegetable seed oils and it doesn't really seem to affect their inflammatory markers or anything else that we can currently detect. But out of an abundance of caution, vegetable seed oils have only been around 100 years. Literally, if you went back in time 200 years, nobody would know what you were talking about. If you said, I want to fry this in cottonseed oil or canola oil or soybean oil, they would be like, where are you from? I don't even know what you're talking about. We fry stuff in beef tallow. We fry stuff in bacon grease. We use suet. We use, I forget the chicken fat. We use animal fat to cook in. That's what we cook in here. We don't know what this vegetable oil you're talking about is. So if something's only been in our diet for 100 years, that obviously cannot be ancestrally appropriate. It cannot be part of a proper human diet. That's an improper food. So I remove it out of an abundance of caution. And we see people who their inflammatory markers get much, much better with that. But I would say the most offensive, most dangerous foods are the highly processed things that contain three ingredients: sugar, grains, vegetable seed oils. So that's going to be any ready to eat breakfast cereal. That's going to be any pastry, any strudel, any cookie, any cake, any pie. Anything like that is going to be a combination. And that also includes pizza crust. It also includes tortillas. It also includes nachos, right? When that's one thing that wakes a lot of people up when you start to look at all the things that you can make with sugar, grains, and vegetable seed oils. It looks like you've got this huge variety of foods at the supermarket, right? Oh no, I eat the rainbow. No, really, 99% of your diet is sugar, grains, and vegetable seed oils. And only when you understand that, you're like, oh, so stay out of the middle of the store. Buy food from the produce section, buy food from the meat section, maybe some food from the dairy, buy some nuts, buy some berries. That's real food. Don't go in the middle of the section where everything's in a cardboard box and is some ratio of sugar, grains, and vegetable seed oils. That's the number 1, 2, and 3 things. If people get that out of their diet, for many people, that takes them close to that 100 total grams of carbs a day. And they immediately start to get healthy if they're over on this end of the distribution curve, right? They immediately start to lose weight. Their A1C's coming down. They're getting better. They're feeling better. Their inflammation's better. They feel like exercising. For some people, that's not that. Those first 3 steps help them, but it doesn't get them to the goal line where they want to be. And so anything that's highly processed that contains sugar, grains, and vegetable seed oils, that's literally the most dangerous, most inflammatory, most unhealthy thing you can eat.
Earlier, when you talked about that range of carbs within the proper human diet, you talked about when we get down, I think it was around 20, it becomes ketosis.
Yeah. Ketogenic for most people. That's right.
So,
Yeah.
do you see additional benefits from producing ketones and being that low, specifically from the ketone aspect?
Yeah. And so we know there's credible research that shows clearly that cardiac myocytes, the heart muscle cells, they pump more efficiently when they're fed on ketones and fatty acids than when they're fed with sugar. I keep hearing on Twitter that your brain needs sugar. But when I reach out to these people and say, which specific neurons, which specific cells, is it astrocytes, is it glial cells, which one needs sugar? I never get an answer to that question. And so until proven otherwise, I think that the brain runs better on ketones than it runs on sugar. I think the heart cell, that's been shown pretty definitively that it runs better. Once you become keto adapted, which for some people it takes 3 days, some people it takes 3 weeks, meaning that basically you ramp up the biochemical machinery that allow your muscles to burn ketones and allow everything to burn ketones optimally. Then you start having long distance triathletes who are completing entire races and placing very high in ketosis the entire race. They're not slamming the sugar gels or the sugar drinks anymore. They're actually burning their own body fat while they run. Ultra marathoners are starting to do this. Bodybuilders, there's several bodybuilders who are natural, winning competitions with none of the steroids and none of the sugars. They're literally in ketosis and they're checking their ketones and posting that saying, look, I just won this natty competition and I was in ketosis my entire training. How is that possible if the muscles need glucose? That should be impossible, but here it is. And so I think that there are multiple benefits to being in ketosis at least part of the day, if not constantly. I think some of the benefits of ketosis, like I said earlier about another subject, I think there are benefits to ketosis that we haven't even discovered yet because everybody's been so interested in researching the next pharmaceutical breakthrough because that's $1 billion paycheck, right? But if you find some new thing that being in ketosis does, okay, you don't make any money for that. You just get to keep your job. So congrats, I guess. So researchers aren't really interested in looking at the benefits of this. But I think that we know the brain works better. We know the heart works better. We know that the muscles are absolutely capable of doing this, running on ketones and fatty acids. So where's the downside? So yeah, I think ketosis is very valuable. I don't know yet if you need to be in ketosis all the time or if you just need to have periods of ketosis and then periods where you're not in ketosis. I don't think the research is clear on that yet. But last time I checked clinicaltrials.gov, there were over 430 ongoing trials right now that have either been registered or are actually in progress looking at a ketogenic diet, a diet that puts you in ketosis for this malady, this disease, this condition, ranging all the way from very rare genetic conditions up to depression, up to dementia, to seizure disorder. Like there's over 400 studies ongoing right now. And if anybody doubts that, just go to clinicaltrials.gov and type in keto, and it'll tell you exactly how many trials have been registered that are going to start soon or that are already underway looking at ketosis as a therapeutic state. And indeed, there are many people in the ketogenic sphere now, MDs and PhDs, who are saying that the default state for humans is ketosis. And that's very controversial if you say that in a mixed audience. But I can't disagree with them. But then also when somebody says, no, it's good to dip into ketosis, but you need to come out, I don't think we know yet. But I think that some of the anthropological evidence based on what people actually ate that we can detect through stable isotope analysis, I think those guys were in ketosis almost all the time. And they obviously did well enough to reproduce and then live to be 70 or 80 because that's when we found their skeleton and reproduce successfully. And so I don't know that the answer to that, but I don't think there's any provable danger to being in ketosis all the time, as you'll hear some influencers say. I don't think there's any research that supports that whatsoever. But I don't know if it's optimal to be in ketosis all the time or if it's optimal to go in and out of ketosis. I don't think we know the answer to that yet. And I'm happy to believe either way as the research leads me.
I know this isn't an animal product, but how do you feel about, say, a C8 MCT oil, adding that to coffee, adding that to a salad dressing for people that are introducing some carbs to their diet and using that to artificially boost ketones?
Yeah, I have no problem with coconut oil or MCT oil. I have no problem with real avocado oil or real olive oil. And you know as well as I do that those two are often adulterated because you can adulterate them with safflower or canola or soybean, and nobody can tell the difference unless they have a biochemistry lab. And so you actually make more money on your olive oil or your avocado oil, and that ain't even what it is. But if it's real, I think that fruit seed oils, which is what olive and avocado are, I think they're probably fine. And then coconut oil, I think, is probably fine. Another way to look at that is you can also make all three of those on your kitchen stove. You don't need a chemical factory, right, or a petroleum distillation setup to make those oils. Those oils are oils that humans have been making for thousands of years. So I think they're probably fine. Now, remember the normal distribution curve. I think there's probably a subset of people that need 100% animal fat. And I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I've talked to many people who's like, if I get off carnivore at all, I start to have inflammation or I start to have this, that, or the other. But I think the vast majority of people can tolerate some coconut oil, avocado oil, olive oil just fine in their diet. And I think for many people that's more of a gateway. Like, yeah, I can walk through that gateway. It doesn't sound nearly as weird as no, everything has to be cooked in beef tallow or bacon grease. You know, that for some people are like, what? So I'm totally fine with somebody ending up at carnivore because they started with low carb, real whole foods. I'm having, and wherever anybody falls on that spectrum, from low carb with real whole food, all the way over to pure 100% lion diet carnivore, as long as they attain their best health, I'm happy. That spectrum, I think, is where every single human on the planet, their best health falls somewhere on that spectrum. of low carb, real whole food to lion diet carnivore. And I don't think that in years to come, I don't think anybody will even try to argue with that. Human beings are by design low carbohydrate mammals.
So we know salt, when somebody is transitioning their diet, can be a good hack to help with that transition. But salt in a general sense, for somebody out there who has, say, made the dietary shift and they found their comfortable level of carbohydrates, how do they know they're getting enough salt on a regular basis? Do they just salt their food to taste and that's good? Or are you somebody that advocates, supplementing with salt on top of that? Or how do you go about figuring that out?
There's this new instrument that has just been invented. I've got an affiliate link. We'll post it down below. It's called the human tongue. Oh, it's not new. It's been around for millions of years. So salt to taste is my principle. And I think for 85, 90% of people, salting your food until it tastes perfectly salted. That's the way you're going to know, because if you need more salt, you're going to crave salt. If you're eating too much salt, salt's going to taste too salty. And Nisha and I, we've got a 3-year-old and a 7-month-old running around the house, and we have salt rocks that I'll just leave it laying on the floor. And we're also not germaphobes. You'll find that out if you delve into our personal life. But Bonnie will crawl by the salt rock some days. She's 7 months old, Bonnie Blue. She won't touch the salt rock, but other days she'll pick that salt rock up and she'll lick it for 3 minutes. And then she'll put it down and move on. And I think that perfectly mirrors every other mammal's behavior on the planet, and also mimics our behavior hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so many doctors and dietitians, if they have not studied anthropology and paleoanthropology, they're like, what do you mean we need salt? What do you mean people have gone out of their way to get salt? I don't even know what you're talking about. Salt is bad. The American Heart Association says we need to eat a low salt diet. How can you even argue with them based on some appeal to nature that every mammal on the planet seeks out salt, and so did we. So in my study of anthropology and paleoanthropology and reading explorer accounts from the 16 and 1700s, every Aboriginal population that they encountered, without exception, did two things. When they killed a mammal, they never drain the blood and waste it. Either they don't drain it at all, therefore the meat and all the tissue is still full of the blood. But the majority of the time, they actually capture the blood and they use the blood. And there, in some countries, there's still, in Poland, you can get blood soup. In many different cultures, there's still blood on the menu. But in America, where Kellogg's and Kraft and Kraft Heinz and Mondelez and other billion-dollar corporations are in charge of our food supply, blood is gross. Blood is perhaps a sin to even eat blood. You want to avoid blood at all costs. You don't even get it on your hands, much less eat it. But our ancestors did not have blocks and tackle that they could hoist a 3,000-pound megafauna up and drain it after they killed it. The blood was still in there. And in many cases, they went out of their way to capture the blood and either drink it immediately or use it to cook with or to store it for later use, because guess what blood is very, very rich in? Salt and electrolytes, right? And so without exception, when you see an explorer encounter an indigenous population that has not been touched by modern society at all, they are always eating the blood. They're either drinking it or they're cooking with it. They're saving it. They're using it. In some cases, they fertilize their crops with it. So then all that nutrition's now in the plants, right? But they were getting salt and electrolytes on a daily basis because blood was part of their daily diet. And if you haven't really made a study of this, that is not something that you would expect. You would think, yeah, there's some weird cultures that eat blood or whatever, but that's rare. No, it was ubiquitous before the 1700s. Every indigenous species or tribe or a collection of people that we encountered, they were eating blood without exception. And often only when they were made to stop doing that because they were taught that that was a sin, or they were taught that it's dangerous or unhealthy or gross, only then begrudgingly would they stop eating the blood. And so, if you tell somebody in modern society, Jesse, oh, you need to start eating blood, they're going to be like, dude, what? That's kooky. That's too much. And so that's the only reason that I helped Keto Chow design the electrolytes and minerals, is because it's currently, the Overton's window is shifted far too far into the everything needs to be sterile and everything needs to be made in a factory. It freaks people out. And so people aren't ready to hear that message yet. And so let's move Overton's window just a little bit, and let's talk about minerals and electrolytes. Let's talk about salt. And then when they're used to that, I think naturally people say, well, I wonder where people got electrolytes and minerals and salt. Well, they were drinking groundwater, number one, which I don't advise today because our systems are too fragile. We can't tolerate the parasites that might be in, the creek water on my farm. Although I am going to start experimenting with it and share that and see how that goes. Also, we never drink groundwater. We never eat blood ever, and so we've lost the two major ways that we used to get minerals, electrolytes, and salt in our diet. So we've got to replace that artificially for now, but hopefully one day when there are enough regenerative farmers and regenerative ranchers out there raising animals and plants properly again, we won't need these products at all. It'll just be in the food again like it used to be.
And Ken, are you somebody who goes right back to the source and consumes blood as part of your diet?
Not yet, but we're currently running sheep, quail, chicken, turkey. I'm about to get some Idaho pasture pigs for the farm, and we are absolutely have full intentions of implementing blood back into our diet, as all of our ancestors did for the last 3.5 million years. It seems gross by modern standards, but it's actually ancestrally appropriate. And it's actually what every single one of your ancestors, you watching this right now, listening to this, every single one of your ancestors before 15,000 years ago ate meat and ingested blood and drank groundwater. There was no alternative. You either did that or you starved to death. And so the reason that's so important is that's the diet we evolved on for at least the last 3.5 million years. That diet is what made us what we are. That's why it's important. This is not just an appeal to nature, which is a logical fallacy. I'm not appealing to nature. Oh, it's natural. Not what I'm saying. I'm saying this is evolutionary. This is ancestrally appropriate nutrition for the human organism.
And you mentioned the fact that groundwater these days isn't safe, but what about bottled water, mineral waters like Pellegrino and some of the better quality ones out there that are in glass? Can we get some of that salt and other minerals by consuming those?
A microscopic amount. If you look at the nutrition data on these mineral waters, first I would try really hard to find one that's very, very low in fluoride or fluoride free. I think that's a big deal that doesn't get talked about enough. But what we do is we'll make reverse osmosis water here at the house. We've got an under sink model, and then I'll add some electrolytes and minerals to it. So we basically clean the water that's been dirtied by modern technology, and that's a whole podcast on its own. How atrocious some of our water supplies are, and then we put the minerals and electrolytes back in, and we sometimes put that in our soda stream, so it's now sparkling. Sometimes we just drink it still. But also, I'm a great fan of Gerald Steiner of Topo Chico, since they fixed their plastic tubing issue and the PFASs are out of there now, hopefully. At least that's what their press release said. Even Perrier, all of them, I try to get them in glass if I can, because I think ingesting too many nanoplastics and microplastics, I think that's probably a big thing, although we don't have the research to prove it yet. I think, they're now finding nanoplastics in amniotic fluid in pregnant women. They're finding nanoplastics in breast milk. It has not been proven dangerous yet. It has not been proven bad, but I think there are probably, it'd probably be difficult to get research money to do a big causation study for that, because there are too many billions of dollars being made on the back of plastic, which is a petroleum product. Probably going to have trouble getting your department head to sign off on such a research study. And so, we go back to the ancestral principle. When did we start consuming lots of nanoplastics and microplastics? 50 years ago. Before that, did we ever consume them? Absolutely not. 0%. Before really 50 or 100 years ago, it was not a thing on this planet, but now it's ubiquitous. That's probably a problem. And so I love Gerald Steiner and Topo Chico and San Pellegrino and Perrier. I try to always get them in glass bottles. And I think you mentioned that as well.
For somebody who is making the changes we're talking about today, and they're going to limit some of these toxins, including the plastics. That's all fine and good from here forward. But what about all the accumulation from the environment to this point? And we're going to get more into the diet piece here, but is cleaning up the diet and cleaning up the environment enough to let the body detox what's already been built up? Or for somebody that is jumping in, like we're talking about here, and say there's somebody who has all that extra weight or they don't and they're just cleaning up their life, do you recommend any kind of detox to get to baseline, or how do you go about looking at that?
So I think there is a degree of detoxification that happens. I do not think that any detox product on the market is necessary. I think they are 100% uniformly a waste of people's money. And if resources are limited, I'd advise you to spend your money on real food, because you have these two very technological organisms in your body already called the liver and called the kidneys. And their literal job, one of their hundreds of jobs, is to purify and detoxify your system. That's what they're for. That's one of their major functions. And so when you stop ingesting the toxins, whether that's nanoplastics, whether that's forever chemicals, which are so ubiquitous now, I don't even know if we can avoid those. The inflammatory stuff in your food, the too many carbohydrates, I think immediately your body starts to detoxify itself. And you're basically, what you're doing by eating a proper human diet is you're giving it a chance to catch up. You're not poisoning your body anymore daily. And I think that's hugely important. And that's why some people, before they start a proper human diet, they feeling miserable. That's their baseline. They don't understand how miserable they really are. They've forgotten what feeling great even feels like. And when they start this way of eating, it gives them a chance to lower their levels of inflammation and to start to detoxify these chemicals. And so I think the vast majority of the detoxification is handled by your liver and your kidneys when you give them a chance to catch up. When you stop basically drinking the toxins out of a fire hydrant and you stop the ingestion, I think they immediately start to catch up. And you start to feel better. And so I'm not an advocate of any of the detox things out there. I don't think they work well enough to justify the expense.
Now that you're done with Ken, you're going to want to head over here and catch my chat with Dr. Chafee. He's another MD who's a carnivore as well. You don't want to miss this. I'll see you over there.
No animal eats the variety of plants that we do. And I think that that's causing and driving most of the modern non